Between the showers, there will be some decent spells of sunshine. Staying pretty blustery, gusty conditions continue. And again, it will be on the mild side with, again, temperatures a couple of degrees above the average, maybe up to 15 or 16 across the southeast. Staying fairly blustery with more showers to come as we go through Tuesday evening and into Wednesday, another day of showers likely, particularly across England and Wales, where we could see some fairly heavy ones at times. But there are signs as we go through Thursday and Friday, certainly for many central and eastern areas, that it will be a little drier, and it's always staying mild.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online. We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case.
Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello and a very warm welcome to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. And coming up in this next hour, we're live to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. World leaders meeting for the COP27 climate, including a certain Boris Johnson. These are the pictures live from the summit, with Boris Johnson warning against climate defeatism and that now is not the moment to go weak on net zero. And from 1 p.m. to another, Rishi Sunak touched down in Egypt last night after previously saying he would not attend that conference. He'll be meeting President Macron of France to try to tackle the cross-channel migrant crisis. But back home, his problems still piling up with growing outrage over bullying allegations against his new minister, Sir Gavin Williamson. It's now been reported he threatened to reveal details about a Tory MP's private life when he was chief whip. The party's investigating, but Labour's pressing for an independent inquiry into bullying allegations. And despite a court injunction, Just Stop Oil are just not stopping. They brought large parts of the M25 to a standstill. Police have managed to take them off overhead gantries. But why do they think they're also above the law? We'll have the latest with our security editor Mark White on what else they may be planning. And don't forget to let us know what you think on all of this. Tweet us at GB News or email gbviews@gbnews.uk. First, the latest headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, just 2 minutes past 12. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Prime Minister is going to call for global mission for clean growth when he addresses the COP27 summit later. Rishi Sunak's going to tell world leaders at the gathering in Egypt that the UK will become a clean energy superpower. He's also expected to argue that Russia's invasion of Ukraine shows the need to move to cheaper and cleaner sources of energy. Well, meanwhile, Boris Johnson, who's also speaking at the summit, will call for an end to defeatism. The former Prime Minister will warn a corrosive cynicism about net zero is ruining efforts to wean the world off fossil fuels. He'll insist it's still possible to achieve a temperature limit goal of 1.5 degrees, avoiding the worst effects of climate change. Well, earlier he was speaking at a fringe event at the conference in a conversation with the New York Times.
We do need to use hydrocarbons in the transitional period, that's obvious. And yes, in the UK there is more that we can do with our own domestic resources. This is not, however, this is not the moment to abandon the campaign for net zero. This is not the moment to turn our backs on renewable technologies.
As world leaders gather to discuss climate concerns, environmental protesters have been disrupting traffic on England's busiest motorway. A number of people have now been arrested for public nuisance after sections of the M25 were closed this morning. One demonstrator explained why she decided to climb the gantry.
Hello, my name is Louise. I'm 24 years old and I'm here. I'm here because I don't have a future. And you might hate me for doing this, and you're entitled to hate me. But I wish you would direct all that anger and hatred at our government. They are betraying young people like me.
The Prime Minister is expected to raise the migrant crisis with his French counterpart a day after demonstrators staged a protest outside the Manston Processing Centre in Kent. Well, hundreds of people gathered in heavy rain, demanding the facility's closure and the sacking of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says Rishi Sunak and Emmanuel Macron need to discuss new tactics to deal with people smugglers.
The focus for my discussion would be on how we work upstream to stop the people smugglers. Before, as a politician, I was the Director of Public Prosecutions. I know how these cross-border operations work. We would work with France upstream to stop the smugglers in the first place. That's the discussion I would have. I hope it's the discussion that our Prime Minister will have.
The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is looking at tax rises and spending cuts of up to £60 billion to address the black hole in the public finances. Treasury sources say that over half of this could come from cuts, which is likely to put further strain on services. The government's currently preparing its autumn statement, which will be announced on the 17th of November. The Bank of England have previously warned that the country is facing the longest recession in over a century. The Prime Minister says texts that were sent by Sir Gavin Williamson to a female colleague were not acceptable or right. Rishi Sunak told The Sun he'd been aware of the messages sent to former Chief Whip Wendy Morton, but didn't know the details. He's under fire for bringing Sir Gavin back into the Cabinet, despite being told he was under investigation. The Business Secretary, Grant Shapps, says the investigation needs to be allowed to get to the bottom of it.
Gavin Williamson, I think it was wrong to send those messages, and clearly it was wrong to send those messages. He has apologised, and this process will get to the bottom of it all, because we don't know if we've got the full picture yet, but that's what this process will show us.
The government says it has contingency plans in place if nurses go on strike amid a growing threat of industrial action in the NHS. The Royal College of Nursing is expected to announce this week that its members have, for the first time, voted in favour of a national strike in a dispute over pay. More than 300,000 members have been balloted, the biggest ever in the union's history. All poultry and captive birds in England have to be kept indoors from today as measures to prevent the spread of bird flu come into force. The UK has been facing its largest outbreak of bird flu, with over 200 cases confirmed in over 90 premises since last October. The new measures are aimed at preventing house birds from interacting with wild ones. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now, back to Newsday.
Rosie, thank you very much indeed, and welcome to GB News Live. And we're going to be reflecting on Prime Minister Rishi Sunak at his first main international event. He's out in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt for that COP27 climate summit, joining other fellow world leaders, albeit arriving perhaps at the last minute. Well, later today, he'll make the speech where he's expected to say the world must deliver on the legacy of last year's COP26 summit in Glasgow. The United Nations has said progress on cutting emissions that cause global warming has been woefully inadequate since last year's event. But poorer countries are pushing for financial compensation for those who say they're responsible for the most historical emissions, including the UK. Well, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's turned up there too, saying he was the spirit of Glasgow, referring to that summit last year, but adding he was there in a supportive role and was glad Rishi Sunak was attending. The spirit of number 10, perhaps. Let's get more with our GB News political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's in Westminster, away from the sunshine, we have to add, Darren. But clearly there may be a few clouds gathering over the Prime Minister, with Boris Johnson having got his message out first.
Yeah, indeed, I can tell you the sun is certainly not shining here in Westminster. This is not Sharm el-Sheikh. But you're right, you'd be almost forgiven for forgetting that the leadership race is somewhat over between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, both battling for the limelight in Egypt at COP27 today. As you said, we heard from the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson a little earlier, essentially saying that he wants to be the spirit of COP in Glasgow last year, i.e. trying to keep alive that target of capping global emissions, or the amount of temperature rise we may well see, to 1.5 degrees, and saying that the way to deal with this is not to indulge in fracking, for example, but rather to invest in renewable energy, while recognising that carbon had to be part of the future narrative as well. Now, we are going to hear from Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, a little later. He's going to talk about the financial commitments that Britain is prepared to make in order to reduce its emissions in the years and decades to come. He will talk about how his government is committed, clearly, to the green agenda, he will argue. But we are in rather difficult circumstances, given the energy crisis we face with the invasion of Ukraine. I think what's most interesting today has been this discussion about so-called reparations, about whether the UK and other Western nations, having industrialised first, having been the largest emitters of carbon into the atmosphere for decades, for centuries, frankly, Mark, whether we in some ways should owe money effectively to the global south. Now, Grant Shapps was asked about this this morning, the cabinet minister, and he suggested it is an idea that shouldn't be taken off the table. Now, many people feel that goes too far, but clearly it will be a political debate. It's something that was stoked, frankly, by Ed Miliband yesterday, the shadow climate secretary. It is a debate, I think, that will be had.
And given that he's out in the desert, still no escaping this gloom of Westminster. The breaking news coming through from Downing Street that the Prime Minister says he has full confidence in Cabinet Office Minister Sir Gavin Williamson. Now, this was obviously a suggestion that maybe he may have to move him on after the texts that were to the former Chief Whip Wendy Morton and other allegations about his behaviour.
Yeah, all rather odd, this. It emerged at the weekend. Gavin Williamson, who had previously been a Chief Whip back in the day, was also briefly Defence Secretary and Education Secretary. I think it's fair to say he didn't necessarily flourish in those last two postings. He's been brought back into the government by Rishi Sunak, but it emerged, as I say, in the Sunday Times yesterday, that he had sent abusive texts to the then Chief Whip, Wendy Morton, and that was viewed as unacceptable by those within government. We heard from government ministers yesterday saying it wasn't acceptable. We heard from Rishi Sunak in the plane on the way over to COP27 that he thought the text messages were unacceptable. There is an allegation of bullying. Now, it is being investigated by Conservative Party Central Office. At the time when these texts were sent in the run-up to the Queen's funeral, Gavin Williamson was merely a backbench MP, though we know that Rishi Sunak was aware of the complaint of bullying made against the Cabinet Office Minister when he appointed him to that post. Rishi Sunak seems to be suggesting that, yes, what he did was not right, it was wrong, but it is not now the time to act because of that investigation. And as you say, in the last couple of minutes, the Downing Street spokesperson here in London has said that the Prime Minister does have full confidence in him. I think for some of the critics, we're likely probably to see more stories emerge about Gavin Williamson in the days to come. There are more allegations in some of the papers today. He's not necessarily the most liked figure, I would suggest, here at Westminster. But people would suggest, why does there need to be an investigation when there's an acceptance by Gavin Williamson, by those in government, by the Prime Minister himself, that the messages were not acceptable?
Yeah.
The political pressure will grow, I think. Labour piling on, saying that the Prime Minister needs to act now on this. But for the time being, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, seems to be digging in, even if it is, as you say, overshadowing slightly that visit to Egypt.
And finally, Darren, just to head back to Egypt, clearly the other aspect is that Sunak is on the international stage, a chance to meet French President Macron and talk about this cross-channel migrant crisis, as many have called it.
Yeah, indeed. It is interesting that, again, on the flight on the way over there, the Prime Minister made clear that he really does want to deal with this with urgency, the crisis in the English Channel involving those small boats. I think what is fascinating, actually, is we've seen a bit of a change, really, from the days of Priti Patel, whether, yes, there was a deal with France. It was rather, I think, begrudgingly done and largely talked about as not necessarily being hugely successful. Now, that narrative has changed in recent days and weeks under this new government. Grant Shapps, even Suella Braverman, but the Prime Minister saying that France have to be part of the solution, that they have stopped 29,000 people crossing the Channel so far this year. They would argue that's not amazing, but it is progress and more can be done. And that in the end, that if they want to sort this crisis out, they are going to have to deal with the French. They're going to need greater cooperation. They're probably going to have to send more money, more resources to the French coastline. But you know what? This meeting will be fascinating. Emmanuel Macron has talked in the past about wanting to cooperate on this issue. I suspect they will make progress. And we are expecting to see a proper summit between the two Interior Ministers, Suella Braverman and her counterpart, in the coming months. And we know there is a UK-French summit penciled in for next year. I think this will be the start of a process that does see greater cooperation when it comes to that issue of illegal migration across the Channel.
Darren, for the moment, thanks very much indeed for that. But let's now speak to John Flesher, who's International Programme Director at the Conservative Environment Network, independent but working closely with the Conservative Party. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, John, as we wait for that speech with Rishi Sunak. But he was a bit late to the party, wasn't he?
I think he's taken the decision, and a wise decision, to attend COP. I think there are great opportunities for him to put the UK's message in there, not least to build on what we achieved when we've been chairing the COP talks, and particularly at the Glasgow COP26 summit last year. So I think he's very new to the job. He's got a lot on the domestic front, but I think he's taken a very wise decision to come to make that case, and crucially, actually to align it with that domestic challenge of the economy, which is certainly not unique to the UK. And he's talking today about clean growth, talking about jobs. I mean, that's exactly the way we are going to take people with us in the efforts to tackle climate change, by doing it in a way that creates those jobs, creates those economic opportunities, not just in the UK, but across the world. And I think that's exactly the right message for him to be bringing to Egypt this week.
Yeah. But do you think he decided to go because he learnt that Boris Johnson was going out there and speaking very early on about this particular issue?
I think you've seen the sort of footage that you've put in your bulletin at the top of the hour there. There are a lot of world leaders there. He's certainly not alone in doing so. Macron's there, President Biden's going as well, a huge number of leaders from across Europe and the developing world as well. So I think, as I say, this is an opportunity for him to advance the UK's agenda, and I'm glad he's chosen to do that. And I'm glad, to add to that Boris Johnson is as well. I mean, Boris Johnson had a very, very strong record on this when he was Prime Minister, and I'm glad he's continuing to speak out on it. I think their messages aren't contradictory. They're both saying it's time we actually act on the pledges that have been made on climate change over many, many years, and we actually see some delivery that's going to result in cutting emissions. And I think they've very different styles, but I think they've both actually got a very complementary message.
The spirit of Glasgow, as he called it. Just looking at what we're expecting the Prime Minister to say, calling for a global mission for clean growth. What do you think that actually means? Because clearly fracking is now out of the equation. Questions about what happens on North Sea oil and gas, and maybe a push on renewables. But given what we're likely to learn on November the 17th, doesn't seem much cash about to put into that.
I think, we shouldn't just see this as something that the public sector is doing. There is huge private sector appetite for this agenda as well. The reason why you've got now, one of the great successes of the UK's presidency of COP is when we started out, we had 30% of the global economy covered by net zero targets. It's now 90%. The reason that's changed isn't just because companies and countries are acting out of the goodness of their hearts. They know this is where the global economy is going, and this is a great opportunity for growth. You don't mention, but wind and solar have plummeted in cost over recent years. The opportunity to create clean domestic industry, so we're not relying on expensive fossil fuels from Russia, from other regimes we would deem pretty unsavoury, I think is a great opportunity to be driving growth, which ignore climate for a moment. For economic reasons, we should be doing these things because we need the jobs, we need the growth. We're about to enter, if we haven't already, a very, very bumpy time economically for a lot of people. Climate change done in the right, climate action done in the right way can be absolutely an integral part of the solution to that.
In terms of growing the economy, yeah. John Flesher from the Conservative Environment Network, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And just to tell you that we will be carrying Rishi Sunak's speech live from Egypt as it happens and getting more reaction. Now, the Royal British Legion's Field of Remembrance has opened today at the National Memorial Arboretum. The field paying tribute to those who've lost their lives in conflicts from World War I until the present day. And a special service is being held to mark its opening, with more than 8,500 commemorative markers and crosses being planted there. Our West Midlands reporter Jack Carson spoke to Mark Ellis at the National Memorial Arboretum.
Yeah, the Field of Remembrance is one of 6 that's located around the country. We've got around 8,500 tributes that have been planted on behalf of people who wish to support the Royal British Legion at what's a very important time for all of us.
And tell me a bit about the planning that's gone into this memorial.
There's a lot of planning takes place. Obviously, the Royal British Legion contact supporters and ask them if they'd like to be part of it. So that's a huge piece of reaching out to people across the country. And then a team of volunteers have planted all the tributes here at the Arboretum, and the team have made sure that we're here and ready to welcome people that wish to attend the dedication service today.
And what's the response been like and demand for people to have a cross and also attend this?
There's been around 55,000 crosses dedicated across the country. We've got about 8,500 here at the Arboretum. So I think as we see year on year, remembrance is increasingly important to people. Service and sacrifice is something that I think a lot of people are thinking about, particularly in modern times. So as always, very important. The public have responded in magnificent style to it.
Why do you think remembrance is so important?
Remembrance has always been important, and remembering those that have served and sacrificed on our behalf, thinking about what they've done so we can be here. And of course there's been so much service and sacrifice through the last few years as we've come through the pandemic, so I think people really are thinking about the past and how that can help us shape the future.
How do you think remembrance has changed over the course of history since we started, of course, in 1919 after the First World War? How do you think remembrance has changed? How have you seen remembrance change?
We've seen here at the Arboretum, we see remembrance on a daily basis. It's something we're very involved in. We're dedicating new memorials here all the time. So clearly there is a need to remember, and I think that's something that grows. The Arboretum was created by our founders to make sure that people could remember in the future, and will be here for generations to come.
The Field of Remembrance opening at the National Arboretum, and just to update you that there will be another opening fairly shortly outside Parliament at New Palace Yard with the Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, opening that. We'll have that for you live as it happens. You're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst, and those Just Stop Oil activists at it again today, this time defying a High Court order as they disrupted the M25, climbing onto gantries. Our Home Affairs and Security Editor Mark White will bring us the latest. But let's take a look at the weather now for you.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. A bit of a drab, dreary affair today. A lot of cloud round. Most places seeing outbreaks of rain, and it is again mild, as it will be for much of this week. Low pressure is dominating. Plenty of weather fronts dangling nearby to the UK, and the isobars fairly close together as well. But the winds are coming up from the southwest, hence why it is pretty mild. These weather fronts bringing outbreaks of rain across Scotland through the rest of today. Rain on and off for western parts of England and Wales. A little drier over eastern England, and parts of the south of England may not see too much rain through the afternoon. afternoon, but for most it will stay pretty drab, not much in the way of brightness, but even without any sunshine, temperatures are going to be above average, many places in the low to mid-teens. Now, this evening we need to watch this band of rain as it comes in. Very heavy rain for a short space of time and accompanied by some really gusty winds, particularly for eastern parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England this evening. It zips across all of England overnight tonight. Those winds just really suddenly gusting up. You may get woken up by that and the potential for those winds to cause some damage as well. It all tends to move out of the way. It turns a little clearer through the early hours. Not a particularly cold night, but then more showers to come tomorrow. Again, some heavy ones likely, particularly for Wales, northwest England and across Scotland. Probably a bit brighter tomorrow, though, so between the showers there will be some decent spells of sunshine. Staying pretty blustery, gusty conditions continue. And again, it will be on the mild side with, again, temperatures a couple of degrees above the average, maybe up to 15 or 16 across the southeast. Staying fairly blustery with more showers to come as we go through Tuesday evening and into Wednesday, another day of showers likely, particularly across England and Wales, where we could see some fairly heavy ones at times. But there are signs as we go through Thursday and Friday, certainly for many central and eastern areas, that it will be a little drier and it's always staying mild.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live, where those Just Stop Oil activists have been defying a High Court order that had banned them from disrupting the M25 motorway. They scaled 8 gantries, closing sections of the motorway in both directions. As tens of thousands of commuters tried to get to work by road, they were at a standstill across several junctions in Surrey, Hertfordshire, London and Essex. The Met Police launched what they said was a significant operation to identify and arrest those it suspected of preparing motorway disruptions, making 3 arrests last night. Well, joining us now in the studio, our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Clearly, those arrests maybe didn't go quite far enough. I mean, this was quite an operation this morning. I'm just looking at the list of junctions affected. It's like a traffic report. Junctions 6, 8 to 9, 12 to 13, 13 to 14, 22, 23, 25 and 30, all on a morning.
And 27 and
27. I missed those
well.
out. Okay. I mean, that's some operation defying, effectively, High Court action.
Yes, indeed. I mean, the police knew that there was a significant protest that was planned for today, not least because Just Stop Oil informed the police themselves yesterday evening and told National Highways as well to implement a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit on the M25. Well, anyone that's ever been on the M25 at rush hour would be lucky if they got 30 miles an hour.
That's when it happens, yeah, indeed.
But if you're listening to us on GB News Radio in your car at the moment, whatever you do, avoid the M25 because these issues are still ongoing. They've resolved some of them.
Right.
Some of those people who've gone up on the gantries, these are the main gantries that hold the digital signs over the motorway. They've gone up on there. Some have been taken down, but others are still up there and causing disruption. And even once it's been cleared, the knock-on effects, as you know, take hours to resolve.
Yeah, like a big elastic band that sort of has to be undone. Let's just reflect on what they're actually saying about what they've taken. We have got this clip from Louise, who is one of those protesters.
I'm here because I don't have a future. And you might hate me for doing this, and you're entitled to hate me. But I wish you would direct all that anger and hatred at our government. They are betraying young people like me. I wouldn't have to be there if they did their lawful duty to their own citizens.
So, a rather tearful 24-year-old Louise, not taking any responsibility for what she was doing, blaming the government, effectively.
Well, yeah, I mean, if she's got an issue with the government, then many members of the public would say, take your issue out with the government, go and protest at Westminster. Better still, take up activism, become a politician, enter the sphere yourself and try to make a change that way, rather than disrupting the ordinary life of individuals.
What happens next? Because we remember this was a sort of campaign that Extinction Rebellion carried out at motorway junctions by sitting in the road.
Yeah.
There was High Court action against them. In the end, was successful. Will we have to wait for the court cases to sort of feed through before this happens again?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is going to take quite a time. Right. Over the weekend, National Highways, at the instruction of the Transport Minister, managed to get an injunction to ban any protests like this on the M25. Well, clearly this is in defiance of that court injunction. Now, the importance of a court injunction is that is not just a minor infraction. You are effectively, going against a court-imposed order. You can be held in contempt of court,
yeah, absolutely.
Which we know then, of course, Mark, can hold a prison term, an unlimited fine. Now, earlier in the year, we had the climate activist group, Insulate Britain. They had many motorway protests like this. They got injunctions for them, but it actually took quite a few months before that was brought to an end, until you went to court, and then the court proceedings got knocked on, people appealed, and then eventually some of those activists went to jail.
By which time there's been a lot of other disruption. As you say, a lot of people will be listening to us on their car radios on GB News Radio. What is the estimate as to when this will be sorted out? Because clearly the police have physically got to get up to those gantries and get them down.
I think it'll be sorted out just in time for rush hour this evening, when you'll be going at a very slow speed around the M25 again. Honestly, these things, Mark, as we know, take an awful long time, because the effect of all that piled up traffic takes an awful long time to clear. And it's not just the ring road around London, it's all the feeder motorways into this
Everyone's trying to get onto the A roads to avoid it, yeah. But, I mean, a lot of people think, how on earth have they managed to get up there? Surely these things are secure in some way to prevent members of the public sort of wandering up there.
There will have to be some kind of access for maintenance crews to go up and to fix these signs that clearly suffer technical issues from time to time. But maybe this is something they'll look at, actually, about trying to make them a bit more secure, because clearly these people at multiple locations around the M25 were able to scale these gantries and cause the disruption they're causing.
The Mark White Traffic Bulletin ends there. Thank you very much indeed for...
Always wanted to do
it
that.
did, absolutely.
AA Road Walk.
Superbly done, even though it was bad news. Thank you very much. Coming up after the break, the planned U-turn on planned rail strikes today. But thousands of commuters still having to look for a train or maybe head out on those motorways. Our GB News reporter bringing us the latest from Ashford International train station down in Kent. Let's get an update now on the headlines with Rosie.
(12:31). Good afternoon. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Prime Minister is going to call for global mission for clean growth when he addresses the COP27 summit later. Rishi Sunak will tell world leaders at the gathering in Egypt that the UK will become a clean energy superpower. He's also expected to argue that Russia's invasion of Ukraine needs to move to cheaper and cleaner sources of energy. As world leaders gather to discuss climate concerns, environmental protesters have been disrupting traffic on England's busiest motorway. A number of people have now been arrested for a public nuisance after sections of the M25 were closed this morning. A spokesperson for the group says similar action was taken at multiple locations along the motorway. Downing Street says the Prime Minister has a zero-tolerance approach to bullying. It comes after it emerged that Sir Gavin Williamson sent threatening texts to former Chief Whip Wendy Morton. Number 10 says Rishi Sunak retains full confidence in the Cabinet Office Minister and welcomes the fact that Sir Gavin expressed regret over the messages. The Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is reportedly looking at tax rises and spending cuts of up to £60 billion to address the black hole in the public finances. Treasury sources say that over half could come from cuts, which is likely to put further strain on services. The government's currently preparing its autumn statement, which will be published on the 17th of November. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Mark will be back in a moment.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
We've been talking about problems those motorists are facing on the M25 because of the Just Stop Oil protests. No better on the rails, because commuters have been facing widespread disruption this morning, as despite that planned strike by RMT union members actually being called off. Well, 12 of the 14 train operating companies say they're running a reduced service because staff rotas had been decided in advance. Well, the walkouts have been planned for today and Wednesday, as well as over the past weekend. The RMT is saying that it's suspended their action after being promised an offer on pay, but doesn't seem to have helped the travellers this morning. Our national reporter Theo Chikomba joining us now from Ashford International Train Station. And Theo, a lot of people seem to have been caught out this morning, arriving to get trains that didn't arrive.
Yes, good afternoon here from Ashford International. I arrived in the early hours of this morning. There weren't too many people around. I'm assuming majority of the had, heard about what's going to be happening today. But as you mentioned there, the train operators saying it's very last minute. This happened on the 11th hour on Friday. At that time, we were expecting to see disruptions on Saturday, which they were still there. But today they are running better, and on Wednesday they're hoping they're going to be running properly again. And you kindly touched there on some of the operators which are running. There's a reduced service today in West Midlands and of course in the Greater and Western Railway as well. And a lot of train operators today, including Greater Anglia, and Hull trains are running full services. Now the RMT, the union which represents those who work on transport such as trains, they were saying they represent members, and they were saying they were due to walk out over the weekend over a long-running dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. But of course, they said they've secured unconditional talks with Network Rail and a promise of pay offer from the train operating companies. Now, as you mentioned, disruption has been happening across today, and the weather is not helping either, similar to what we've seen on the M25 as well.
OK, so let's put you in the Mark White travel reporter role. If anyone's going to head to Ashford at the moment, what can they expect? I mean, are there trains running, or they've just been cancelled at short notice?
Yes, well, if they do want to head over to Ashford, there are trains running. They've been running quite smoothly since the early hours of this morning, around 7 o'clock. But they are saying, please do check in advance before you come here. And they are going to be closing their services or running their services not throughout the evening, but around 5 or 6 o'clock, there'll be less trains. So for those who are wanting to get home, do check before you travel as well.
OK, Theo, thank you for that. We'll let you get back out of the rain into the waiting room. Thanks very much indeed. Well, let's get more now with travel editor, The Independent, Simon Calder. Simon, thanks for joining us once more at what looks to be a fairly busy concourse there. What's the picture that you're getting?
Yes, I'm actually here, would you believe, Mark, at World Travel Market. This is the annual celebration of the travel industry where the entire world shows up, or at least if they've been able to get a train here. And as we were hearing from Theo's excellent report, that is very, very patchy across the country, with a lot of big train operators, including Avanti West Coast on the West Coast Main Line, Great Western Railway serving South Wales and the west of England from London, saying, do not travel. We're running a much reduced service, and if you do turn up, then, well, first of all, expect disruption. Secondly, try and make sure that you know when the last train is, because they will be setting off very, very early today. And thirdly, well, good luck. And a lot of people, Mark, are thinking, hang on, it's now Monday afternoon. The strike was called off on Friday afternoon. Why is this still going on? Well, I'm afraid it's because that's the way that the travel industry is organised. The rail industry, the drivers have a long-standing agreement. Generally, their rosters are assigned a week in advance. And that was known to the RMT union when they called off the strike. And so effectively, and I've had some very angry people getting in touch with me from various parts of the country, Mark, saying, hang on, this looks like rail staff getting 2 or 3 days holiday while on full pay. Much more complicated than that. There are staff manning ticket offices with no trains, signal boxes with no trains. But of course, there are many other people, maintenance workers, for instance, for Network Rail, who are out and about and working today. So very messy. And this continues, I'm afraid, till Thursday, whereupon, if you're in the capital, of course, there's a strike by staff working for London Underground and London Overground.
Yeah, what's the latest on that? I mean, I asked someone this morning at... well, they were very helpful to say we don't know at Paddington Station, but clearly a lot of travellers trying to make arrangements, thinking perhaps if the rail stoppages has been sorted out, what's happening about the London Underground one?
Well, that is still very much a live dispute, and the fact that the RMT have called off this particular national strike shouldn't automatically make it clear that things are all sweetness and light. For example, in Scotland, there is an overtime ban that means that many services are cut back. Furthermore, the London Underground and London Overground strikes are going ahead as normal. Obviously, if you're outside of the capital, that won't necessarily be of any great import to you. But remember that ASLEF, the train drivers union, also have a live dispute going on, and the RMT union, meanwhile, is balloting its members, as they have to do legally, to get a mandate for further national strikes. So I'm afraid the picture, all told, is of an industry that isn't really getting back onto a positive place where there's general sweetness and light. And this, of course, very, very frustrating for rail passengers and also for the taxpayers, who at the moment are pumping millions of pounds into an industry where the fare revenue has fallen off a cliff since the COVID pandemic.
The other thing is what it means, of course, for UK PLC. You're at that international trade fair. Presumably this has a huge impact on our image and indeed our economy for all those visitors coming from abroad. As I said, Paddington, people coming off the Heathrow Express thinking, you know, how can you run a country like this? I think was one of the comments I heard.
Oh, sure, yes. I mean, people coming into Gatwick Airport, for instance, Saturday evening, they landed at the UK's second busiest airport, and there was no way of getting into London without getting by public transport, unless you got a coach to Heathrow and then the underground from there. No trains running at all, and that's when there isn't a strike on. So I'm afraid the UK's reputation for, in the travel industry in general has taken a heck of a battering in the past few months, and that's just yet one more aspect of it. And let's hope that in a year's time, when they come back, everything is functioning absolutely perfectly, and that rail travel is back to its normal, pretty reliable self.
Simon, for the moment, thank you. We'll let you go and fly the flag for Britain there across the concourse. Thanks very much indeed. Now, from today, poultry and captive birds in England being kept indoors, locked up as part of the measures to prevent the spread of bird flu. It's a bird lockdown. UK facing its largest outbreak of bird flu, more than 200 cases confirmed since last October. Well, the new measures being aimed at preventing house birds or captive birds interacting with wildfowl. Joining us now is Tom Koppas, manager at Koppas Turkey, a family business at Cookham. Tom, just tell us how you're coping, or not, as the case may be there for you.
Well, touch wood, we are not affected by bird flu, but if it was for all poultry producers, to be honest, it's a matter of time, not if. It's so severe. It is equivalent. It is a COVID for poultry. So the housing order is a welcome change and a welcome enforcement to hopefully reduce the chances of it spreading through the UK, but it's only one small step and it won't provide a complete solution.
OK, so I assume that the flock you've got is free range. What does that mean now in terms of what happens in the run-up to Christmas? Presumably you can't let them out. Do you actually cull them within the buildings and then move them on to the suppliers for Christmas?
No, so we are actually very fortunate because our turkeys tend to be older than the commercial or supermarket ones. They've already been free-ranging long enough, so we actually voluntarily housed them a while ago to ensure the supply of our turkeys to our customers for Christmas. But this is more aimed at the commercial lines where effectively the trading standards they work under, they must be free-range. They're now allowed to house those and still be regarded as free-range.
OK, and what does that mean, I hear all the viewers and listeners at home, for turkey prices for this Christmas? Because as we know, poultry generally, you know, the price has been creeping up for the past few months.
It has been. Well, we set our prices back in September. We have had to introduce a bird flu surcharge because we've got more biosecurity, we're employing more staff, we're processing birds earlier. But I heard a story today, I think it was Lidl's turkey has gone up 32% compared to where they plan to be. It is have a big impact on the farm gate cost of producing these turkeys, no doubt.
Yeah, and what about the availability, given the fact that obviously a lot of these birds now are literally cooped up?
So we are doing all we can. So we are processing our birds earlier as well, so we can ensure supply of our turkeys to our customers. Doing everything you normally do, dry age and dry pluck them. But we are seeing in the sector, in the industry, there are over 1 million turkeys now short of the Christmas turkey market. Normally about 10 million turkeys in the UK for Christmas, and we're down at least lost 1 million so far, and we won't be the last.
That might be why we've just seen lots of pictures of chickens on our screen, as well as the turkeys, which, of course, you won't want to actually see happening. But, I mean, given all the warnings about what it can do to birds, I mean, the other message we're getting is that there's not much of a risk to human health, and clearly people will be worried about what they're buying to eat at home.
Absolutely. It's not a risk of human health. No, there is no, I've been had that and good assurance as well. You know, even if it was an infected bird, it's completely safe for a human to eat. It's more about trying to stop the spread of this disease and the spread of the disease through wild birds because of the huge effects it has. And obviously, it's currently in poultry. We don't want to see it jump to other breeds, whether it jump to pigs or something like that. We want to obviously contain it to poultry.
Indeed. And very quickly then, what's the position about you as a business? Do you get compensation from anyone?
There is an element of compensation, but the real challenge for producers like us, we produce turkeys just for Christmas. And so if we were to get it now, we'd obviously lose this year's flock, and we get compensated on what currently it stands on what is being culled, not a percentage of what's being culled, rather than what's actually on the ground when inspection. So NFU are working with DEFRA to try and change that, so it's actually based on what at the point you get found to have bird flu. But the other thing is, if we were to get it now, even with effective cleaning and disinfection of the ground and everything, we still wouldn't be able to actually rear turkeys for 12 months. So the business would be effectively out of business for 2 years.
Wow. Well, we wish you well, Tom, and I was going to say Merry Christmas, but trying to have a good Christmas at least. Thanks for talking to us here on GB News Live. We wish you every success, and perhaps we'll head back to Tom a little bit nearer Christmas to see how things are. Now, on to other matters. With victims of that contaminated blood scandal calling on the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, to ensure that those who allegedly covered it up are held accountable. Up to 30,000 people being infected with contaminated blood products in the 1970s and 80s. It's been described as the worst treatment disaster in NHS history. One woman infected with hepatitis has told GB News that her fight for justice is ongoing, as Alice Porter now reports.
It's taken over my life. That's the price that I've had to pay for being infected by the state and also having to fight the state for justice.
Colette Wintle is a haemophiliac. When she was a teenager, she was infected with hepatitis B and C. She now has cirrhosis and has battled liver cancer. The ongoing inquiry into the scandal is partly the result of her tireless campaigning.
It seems to me incredible that over 3,000 haemophiliacs have now died, and to have nobody ultimately, even when this inquiry is done, being held to account for their part in this disgraceful medical scandal is shocking.
Next year we're going to have a report from the inquiry. What are your concerns?
I personally feel that there are certain individuals within the profession who remain alive now who should be prosecuted for what they did, because they cannot claim not to have the knowledge prior to treating their patients. They did know that they were taking risks with those patients' lives.
Colette has just received an interim payment of £100,000, with full compensation expected once the inquiry concludes. But children of victims are fighting for compensation. Lauren Palmer's father was infected with hepatitis C and HIV. He unknowingly infected her mother. They both died when she was 9.
I haven't been able to stay at home and save with a family. I've had to be very independent, and it's just brought on struggle after struggle. I haven't had that luxury of having two parents that can support me through life. The compensation is about the recognition and some element of justice being paid, but it doesn't really tackle everything, so charges won't be brought.
A government spokesperson said, "These interim payments are only the first step in addressing this historic wrong, and we acknowledge there is still more work to do." With another new Health Secretary in Cabinet, Colette is urging Steve Barclay to implement all recommendations from the inquiry when it concludes next year.
One of the things that's come out of this inquiry, which for me has been pretty shocking, was many of the people put in charge of the blood policy had no qualifications or training or background whatsoever. And mistakes were made by the dozen, and people lost their lives because of failure in government.
Alice Porter, GB News.
Now, let's return to those Just Stop Oil protests. The activists defying a court order banning them from disrupting motorways by scaling 8 gantries on the M25, closing sections of the motorway in both directions in this morning's rush hour. Problems we're being told, still being suffered. So if you're listening to us on GB News Radio, we'll try and update you when we get more details. But to discuss the problem further now, we're joined by motoring journalist Danny Kelly. Danny, thanks for joining us. Here we go again, it seems.
It's scandalous. I watched one of the videos of a 24-year-old young woman hysterically screaming that she had no future. You know what? She even started, when I was watching her, she even started in my mind to even look like Greta Thunberg. They're sort of morphing into Greta Thunberg, these young activists. It's a disgrace. This is contempt of court, Mark, as well. Contempt of court is one of the most serious of the criminal infringements, because you are basically undermining, even though it's a low-level crime, you are undermining the sanctity of our judicial system. I hate what they do. I don't hate them individually. They are deluded if they think they're going to change government policy by attaching themselves to a gantry on the M25. All they're doing, ironically, Mark, is having thousands of cars idling, pumping out CO2 into the air, something that they're trying to put a stop to. It's just counterintuitive. They're not going to change government policy, and the working class man and woman have had enough of it.
Yeah, as you say, obviously, CO2 levels much lower if you're driving at 55 miles an hour on a motorway as opposed to standing still there. But a lot of questions being asked to how on earth did they manage to get up? I think it's 8 separate gantries. One assumes there must be security gates or locks on these things, but they just managed to climb up over the top of the motorway.
It's as straightforward as that. It really is. And one thing I'm happy about, Mark, is that the old bill, the police are being proactive now. They're starting to put doors through at 5 in the morning and scream, police, 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 as they run upstairs and handcuff these zealots. That's what they should have done a while ago. And I'm looking at your VT there, Mark. Look at the thousands and thousands of diesel lorry engines and cars and petroleum cars just sitting there, polluting the environment, something that they are dead set against. And I tell you, Mark, what also annoys the working class man and woman, not necessarily when they're hanging from gantries, is when they're in the capital protesting. And when the old bill, when a police officer, the much needed Metropolitan Police, it takes 4 of them to pick one of these loonies up, because they flop out, they make it as difficult as possible for the Met to put them in the back of the police cars. And those hard-working men and women of the Metropolitan Police should be in the tough inner city areas, trying to prevent knife crime, trying to prevent robberies and muggings. Yet it takes 4 of them, deliberate act to try and slow down the Met. It's a scandal.
OK, well, clearly from what the police were saying, they did make arrests, I think 3 arrests early this morning as a result of intelligence, so that they're obviously trying to get on top of it. But the sophistication of the operation to, I mean, just looking at the various junctions affected from 6 and 8 to 9 all the way up to junctions 30, it's been quite cleverly thought out.
Oh, yes, without a doubt. Listen, although I hate their actions, I don't hate them individually. One has to admire the tenacity and determination of these people, Mark. You really have to have some courage, because they know that they're facing a prison sentence because they are breaching a contempt of court order from a judge. Now, listen, I don't like what they do. I admire their tenacity. I wish they'd go about it in a different way. They would argue, Mark, that they've tried different ways. But I remind you once again, if they think they are going to change government policy by gluing themselves to streets in the capital, by hanging from gantries across the M25, they are absolutely crazy.
OK, just a quick thought, though, because obviously we've got everyone out in Sharm el-Sheikh at the summit, the COP27, where we're being told that the UN chief said we're all on a highway to climate hell. Do you think that maybe given those warnings coming out from all these world leaders that we maybe ought to stop and just rethink our approach a bit?
Very much so, Mark. I'm not disputing what they're trying to achieve. I'm not a climate change denier at all. All I am doing is saying that you are frustrating the average man and woman trying to go about and do their business. That's all I'm saying. They have lost. I genuinely believe they have lost the majority of support that they once had. Once you start affecting people's journeys, once you start stopping people making medical appointments, hospital appointments, then you are on a hiding to nothing when it comes to public support. Forget Sharm el-Sheikh. We're talking about the average Joe just trying to make a living, putting food on the table and paying their excessive mortgages because of that disastrous budget a month ago.
Danny, as ever, thanks for your views here on GB News. And, of course, we'll see how people carry on regardless on that motorway this afternoon. Thank you very much. We'll try and keep you updated, but certainly the problems still at several of those junctions, we're being told, into this afternoon. Plenty of reaction coming in from you on this. Sheila, first of all. Sorry, I have zero tolerance for these people. I don't understand why the police need to close the motorway. Traffic could still flow. I think, obviously, the problem is health and safety preventing that. Clive, meanwhile, every time they block the roads, I drive faster and turn up my thermostat. Not sure that's that green, Clive, on that particular point. Anyway, Jeremy saying short, sharp prison sentences will make some of these protesters think twice, which, of course, they could be facing contempt of court. Peter, meanwhile, the reason these people continue with their actions is that they know they will be given the oxygen of publicity. The best way to stop them is to maximise the penalties, and minimise the publicity. Interesting point, but of course we feel we have to actually cover the news as it happens. Well, stay with us here on GB News Live. Lots more to come in these next few hours, including the latest from the COP summit. Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, will be speaking. First, though, what's the latest weather got in store for us?
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. A bit of a drab, dreary affair today. A lot of cloud around. Most places seeing outbreaks of rain, and it is, again, mild, as it will be for much of this week. Low pressure is dominating. Plenty of weather fronts dangling nearby to the UK, and the isobars fairly close together as well. But the winds are coming up from the southwest, hence why it is pretty mild. These weather fronts bringing outbreaks of rain across Scotland through the rest of today. Rain on and off for western parts of England and Wales. A little drier over eastern England, and parts of the south of England may not see too much rain through the afternoon. But for most, it will stay pretty drab. Not much in the way of brightness, but even without any sunshine, temperatures are going to be above average, many places in the low to mid-teens. Now, this evening, we need to watch this band of rain as it comes in. Very heavy rain for a short space of time and accompanied by some really gusty winds, particularly for eastern parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England this evening. It zips across all of England overnight tonight. Those winds just really suddenly gusting up. You may get woken up by that, and the potential for those winds to cause some damage as well. It all tends to move out of the way. It turns a little clearer through the early hours. Not a particularly cold night, but then more showers to come tomorrow. Again, some heavy ones likely, particularly for Wales, northwest England and across Scotland. Probably a bit brighter tomorrow, though, so between the showers there will be some decent spells of sunshine. Staying pretty blustery, gusty conditions continue, and again, it will be on the mild side, with, again, temperatures a couple of degrees above the average, maybe up to 15 or 16 across the southeast. Staying fairly blustery, with more showers to come as we go through Tuesday evening. And into Wednesday, another day of showers likely, particularly across England and Wales, where we could see some fairly heavy ones at times. But there are signs as we go through Thursday and Friday, certainly for many central and eastern areas, that it will be a little drier, and it's always staying mild.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case.
Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello and welcome to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. And coming up this hour, the UN Secretary-General has told world leaders we are on a highway to climate hell. Rishi Sunak due to speak at the COP27 summit in Egypt later this afternoon. We'll have that for you live. Well, earlier, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson spoke to the delegates, warning of climate defeatism. He also said that now was not the time to go weak on net zero. We'll have the latest from Sharm el-Sheikh, where Rishi Sunak will also be raising the issue of small boats crossing the channel with Emmanuel Macron. He said that solving the migrant crisis is his key priority at the climate summit. It's also being reported that Britain and France will reach an agreement on allowing border force staff onto the beaches of France. And the Grenfell fire inquiry set to end this week, having spanned 5 years, 320,000 documents, and more than £150 million in taxpayer cash spent in legal costs. The closing statements this afternoon will have the latest on that, plus reaction too. And let us know what you think of all the topics we're discussing as ever at GB News for the tweets. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Latest news headlines now with Rosie.
A very good afternoon to you. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 1. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The COP27 Climate Summit has been told the world's action on climate change is either a collective solidarity or a collective suicide pact. The UN Secretary-General says countries need a clear, financed roadmap to prevent irreversible climate chaos. Antonio Guterres is calling for a universal early warning system within the next 5 years and for all governments to have a windfall tax on fossil fuel companies. He says we're in the fight of our lives and we're losing.
The two largest economies, the United States and China, have a particular responsibility to join efforts to make this pact a reality. And this is our only hope of meeting our climate goals. Humanity has a choice: cooperate or perish. It is either a climate solidarity pact or a collective suicide pact.
Boris Johnson, who's also speaking at the summit, is calling for an end to defeatism. The former Prime Minister will warn a corrosive cynicism about net zero is ruining efforts to wean the world off fossil fuels. Well, earlier he spoke at a Fringe event in a conversation with the New York Times.
We do need to use hydrocarbons in the transitional period. That's obvious. And yes, in the UK, there is more that we can do with our own domestic resources. This is not, however, this is not the moment to abandon the campaign for net zero. This is not the moment to turn our backs on renewable.
Well, as world leaders gather to discuss climate concerns, environmental protesters have been disrupting traffic on England's busiest motorway. A number of people have now been arrested for public nuisance after sections of the M25 were closed this morning. One demonstrator explained why she decided to climb a gantry.
Hello, my name is Louise. I'm 24 years old and I'm here. I'm here because I don't have a future. And you might hate me for doing this, and you're entitled to hate me. But I wish you would direct all that anger and hatred at our government. They are betraying young people like me.
The Prime Minister is also expected to raise the migrant crisis with his French counterpart a day after demonstrators staged a protest outside the Manston Processing Centre in Kent. Hundreds of people gathered in heavy rain, demanding the facility's closure and the sacking of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says Rishi Sunak and Emmanuel Macron need to discuss new tactics to deal with people smugglers.
The focus for my discussion would be on how we work upstream to stop the people smugglers. Before, as a politician, I was the Director of Public Prosecutions. I know how these cross-border operations work. We would work with France upstream to stop the smugglers in the first place. That's the discussion I would have. I hope it's the discussion that our Prime Minister will have.
Downing Street says the Prime Minister has a zero-tolerance approach to bullying. Well, it comes after it emerged that Sir Gavin Williamson sent threatening texts to the former Chief Whip, Wendy Morton. Number 10 says Rishi Sunak retains full confidence in the Cabinet Office Minister and welcomes the fact that Sir Gavin expressed regret over the messages. The Chancellor's looking at tax rises and spending cuts of up to £60 billion to address the black hole in the public finances. Treasury sources say that over half of this could come from cuts, which is likely to put further strain on services. The government's currently preparing for its autumn statement, which will be announced on the 17th of November. The Bank of England have previously warned the country's facing the longest recession in over a century. All poultry and captive birds in England have to be kept indoors from today as measures to prevent the spread of bird flu come into force. The UK has been facing its largest outbreak of bird flu, with over 200 cases confirmed in over 90 premises since last October. The new measures are aimed at preventing house birds from interacting with wild ones. Tom Koppus, who's manager of Koppus Turkey, says there's no risk to human health.
It's not a risk of human health. No, there is no. I've been had that on good assurance as well. Even if it was an infected bird, it's completely safe for a human to eat. It's more about trying to stop the spread of this disease and the spread of the disease through wild birds because of the huge effects it has. And obviously, it's currently in poultry. We don't want to see it jump to other breeds, whether it jump to pigs or something like that. We want to obviously contain it to poultry.
You're up to date now on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops now. Back to Mark.
Rosie, thanks very much and welcome back to GB News Live with the Prime Minister in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt for that COP27 climate summit. He's joining fellow world leaders, despite, of course, earlier saying he might be too busy to attend. But he is now making a speech where he's expected to say the world must deliver on the legacy of last year's COP26 climate summit, which, of course, was in Glasgow. However, the UN has warned that progress on cutting emissions that cause global warming has been woefully inadequate since last year's event in the UK. And former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's also there, saying he was the spirit of Glasgow, but adding he was there in a supportive role and was glad that Rishi Sunak was attending. Meanwhile, back home, Downing Street confirming that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak retains full confidence in this man, the Cabinet Office Minister Sir Gavin Williamson, after it's emerged that threatening and abusive texts were sent to the former Chief Whip, Wendy Morton. Let's get more to digest all this from Tom Harwood, who's joining us from Westminster. And Tom, clearly this is a set piece now for the Prime Minister in Sharm el-Sheikh, his first on the world stage. But clearly, given the fact that he nearly didn't attend, we question what weight his words will carry.
Oh, certainly. The Prime Minister definitely felt pressured into attending this COP27 summit. He's only here today. He'll be flying back to the United Kingdom this evening, and he's had a number of busy meetings already ahead of his speech we're expecting at 4 p.m. Already this morning he's met the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, he's met the President of the UAE, and he's met the Prime Minister of Italy. Now, what's interesting about all of these meetings this morning is that they don't all focus on the climate. We learn about the other issues in the readouts of these meetings, which include, for example, the Northern Ireland Protocol and support for Ukraine. They were discussed with Ursula von der Leyen. Regional security and the situation in Iran, as well as a Gulf trade deal possibility, was discussed with the President of the UAE. And the migration crisis was discussed with the new Prime Minister of Italy. So number 10 being very clear that whilst the Prime Minister is there and is talking, of course, about the climate, this is an opportunity to talk to other world leaders about other big issues too.
Yeah, and one of the sort of top issues for his in-tray back in Downing Street is this cross-channel migrant crisis. What are we expecting in terms of the meeting with Emmanuel Macron and what they could come up with as a solution?
Yes, this is a big meeting that has been pre-trailed, that will be taking place this afternoon. And it does seem that the United Kingdom and France are working together on yet another deal to try and deal with these small boats. It will likely mean more British money being given to the French, but also more French cooperation and harsher policing trying to stop these boats. It could even go as far as involving some elements of interception, although we're not yet sure whether that is really on the table. There's some understanding that there was a deal being worked up through the summer that then eventually fell apart. One report this morning suggests that actually it was the former Prime Minister Liz Truss's comments about questioning whether or not Emmanuel Macron was a friend or a foe that sort of dismantled those talks over the summer. Well, there's a fresh Prime Minister in place now, and this is their first meeting between Sunak and Macron, the first meeting in their new positions, in Mr Sunak's new position as Prime Minister. Might a warmer relationship between these two men be the instigator for a new, fresh deal between the United Kingdom and France? That's the hope of number 10. However, it's unlikely that any of these deals will be particularly seismic in dealing with the issue. It will be an iterative process because, of course, we know the scale of the issue, the sheer numbers that are coming across, almost double the numbers from last year, which in turn were almost double the numbers of the year before.
Tom, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. But let's reflect more on that meeting with the French president later. Let's talk now to Paris-based journalist David Chazan, who is joining us. David, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News Live. And we reflect that maybe Emmanuel Macron needs some good press as much as Rishi Sunak does.
Well, things are certainly difficult for Mr Macron. Of course, he was re-elected president earlier this year, only to lose his parliamentary majority. He's facing a challenge from the far-right party led by Marine Le Pen. And of course, migration and border controls are a big issue for the far-right in France. Also, the relationship between Britain and France did deteriorate somewhat under the Boris Johnson government. And so the signals I'm picking up from the French now is that they welcome the arrival of Rishi Sunak as an opportunity for a reset. And so I think they're certainly going to be discussing what they can do about the number of migrants crossing the Channel from northern France in small boats.
Yeah. Given this pressure that Macron is under from the far right, what could the solutions be that he might offer? I mean, he's not going to want British border force officials on French beaches, is he?
Well, that's extremely unlikely, and this is something that's been raised repeatedly in recent years, and the French have always rejected it on the grounds that it would infringe French sovereignty. Now, I've been hearing that there could be, and this is only a possibility, it's not definite, a kind of a compromise whereby British border force would have observers on the beaches, perhaps working with the French border police, not actually intercepting migrants themselves, but observing and lending support to the French.
And what do we know about action against the criminal gangs that are said to have been organising a lot of these boats? Clearly, Albanian organised criminals have been much in the headlines recently. Are the French identifying these people smugglers and taking action there?
Well, the French have identified some of them, and a number of them have been brought to trial and convicted in France. What the French say is that some of these gangs are actually based in the UK, and they are headed by Albanians living in the UK. And so here again, this requires a high degree of cooperation between the two countries if more is to be done.
And sort of give us a picture of what else is happening there in France with that sort of area that was known as the jungle near Sangatte. And we remember, obviously, everyone jumping on the lorries. Clearly now has become a bit more sophisticated with the boats being launched.
Well, it's become... migrants have turned to boats simply because it's become a lot more difficult to board lorries because the controls are far more rigorous and tighter. So a small boat now seems like the easiest option, and that's certainly the one that the people smuggling gangs are encouraging migrants to take. Now, there is no longer a huge camp with thousands of migrants in northern France. The camps have been largely dismantled, but there are migrants there spread out across a wider area, and that's why we've seen this doubling of the number of migrants crossing the channel this year compared to last year.
Yeah, I'm just trying to identify where they're actually launching from. Well, David, in Paris, thank you very much indeed for that. And, of course, we'll see what emerges in that meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh a little later. But thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
And, of course, we will bring you that from Sharm el-Sheikh with that meeting with the French president. Now, let's just update you on what's been happening around the M25, particularly if you're listening to us on GB News Radio, where you're stuck in the cars. The list I've got of the various junctions being affected by these protests earlier. Junction 6 in Surrey, 8 to 9, 12 to 13, 13 to 14, 22, 23, 25, 27, 30. These were the pictures from the gantries where the protesters, at least 8 gantries being scaled, and police had to stop traffic on the motorway because of the health and safety concerns. They have actually arrested some people and taken them down from the gantries, but clearly the problem is that the traffic that built up is still causing widespread disruption. And this was despite High Court injunctions being taken out and 3 people being arrested, we're told, over the weekend before these protests took place. The High Court action, similar to, as you may remember, the Insulate Britain protests when they actually glued themselves to the road surface, is to stop people coming anywhere near these motorways. And they do face contempt of court action. This just reminds you of the scenes at Downing Street last week when they tried to climb over the barriers at Downing Street and glue themselves to the pavement and to the barriers there. The latest that we're getting on the campaign itself is that they will be jailed or given an unlimited fine or their assets seized if they continue with an unlawful demonstration against this High Court injunction. But clearly, as we've heard and seen earlier, they are determined to continue their message of protest, and we'll see what occurs, of course, in the days to come. But if you're trying to head out on road or rail, take a brolly. Here's the weather. Just coming up for you now.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. A bit of a drab, dreary affair today. A lot of cloud round. Most places seeing outbreaks of rain, and it is again mild, as it will be for much of this week. Low pressure is dominating. Plenty of weather fronts dangling nearby to the UK, and the isobars fairly close together as well. But the winds are coming up from the southwest, hence why it is pretty mild. These weather fronts bringing outbreaks of rain across Scotland through the rest of today. Rain on and off for western parts of England and Wales. A little drier over eastern England, and parts of the south of England may not see too much rain through the afternoon. But for most, it will stay pretty drab. Not much in the way of brightness, but even without any sunshine, temperatures are going to be above average, many places in the low to mid-teens. Now, this evening, we need to watch this band of rain as it comes in. Very heavy rain for a short space of time and accompanied by some really gusty winds, particularly for eastern parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England this evening. It zips across all of England overnight tonight. Those winds just really suddenly gusting up. You may get woken up by that, and the potential for those winds to cause some damage as well. It all tends to move out of the way. It turns a little clearer through the early hours. Not a particularly cold night, but then more showers to come tomorrow. Again, some heavy ones likely, particularly for Wales, northwest England and across Scotland. Probably a bit brighter tomorrow, though, so between the showers there will be some decent spells of sunshine. Staying pretty blustery, gusty conditions continue, and again, it will be on the mild side, with again temperatures a couple of degrees above the average, maybe up to 15 or 16 across the southeast. Staying fairly blustery, with more showers to come as we go through Tuesday evening and into Wednesday. Another day of showers likely, particularly across England and Wales, where we could see some fairly heavy ones at times. But there are signs as we go through Thursday and Friday, certainly for many central and eastern areas, that it will be a little drier, and it's always staying mild.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, the Grenfell Tower inquiry has resumed today after a 3-month break with closing statements from the lawyers. Panel members have studied more than 320,000 documents connected to the blaze that killed 72 people back on the 14th of June in 2017. And so far, £150 million of taxpayers' money has been spent on various legal fees. Let's speak now to our national reporter, Ellie Costello, who's in Kensington for us. And Ellie, clearly a lot of people want answers as to what went wrong and to find out what can be done to prevent such an awful tragedy happening again.
Well, yes, exactly. Good afternoon to you, Mark. And it has been a very heavy, a very emotional morning, listening to the lawyers who are representing the bereaved, the survivors, the residents of Grenfell Tower, which still stands not even 2 miles from where I am now, where 72 people died on the night of the 14th of June 2017. And those lawyers were making their closing statements today in what is phase 2 of this inquiry, which is looking into what caused the fire that night. I just want to bring you some of those statements that were made this morning because they really were very, very moving and very powerful. Ms. Stephanie Barwise, King's Counsel, said that the manufacturers knew that the cladding that was wrapped around Grenfell Tower was highly flammable, and she said that this was clear from internal emails. She also added that one of the biggest failures on the night was that there was no adequate means of escape for disabled people, that disabled people were expected to wait in the stairwells for the fire to be put out. Danny Friedman, King's Counsel, said that Grenfell was a human rights disaster. Grenfell's victims and some of the perpetrators came from all over the world, but he said this was a disaster made in Britain. And finally, let me bring you some comments from Imran Khan, King's Counsel, who said that institutional racism had played a part in the disaster. He described that Grenfell Tower was also known as Moroccan Tower, and he said that 85% of the people that died that night were from minority ethnic backgrounds. And he said the way they were treated before, during and after the fire proves that racism contributed to the loss of those 72 lives. Well, as I said, Mark, there was 2 phases to this inquiry so far. Phase 1, which wrapped in October 2019, that looked at the events of the night, and this phase is focusing on what caused the blaze. But there are still hundreds of people up and down the UK who are still living in unsafe flats that are wrapped in the same sort of cladding that was around Grenfell Tower. And one of those people is Paul Ashvar, and he spoke to me this morning.
I first found out that my building was affected by cladding in December 2 years ago. It ruined Christmas. It's made us all put life on hold. And to be honest, it's been real anxiety since then.
How has it affected you personally?
It's sleepless nights. I think this is the real thing that people forget about cladding. This is a human tragedy as well as one around building and fire safety. Our lives are put on hold. You can't really plan anything for the future. You're worried about living in a dangerous, potentially dangerous building. And of course, this is affecting tens of thousands of people, first-time buyers who've had to work hard and save up hard for their flats in the UK. It shouldn't be this way.
What have you been told by your developers? Is remedial work going to be done?
Our developers have been unfortunately very silent on this matter. They were the ones who caused it, and I believe, and turns out the government agrees, that they should fix it. The communication has come from our building management company. We were told actually by them that work was going to be started in the summer and potentially completed this year. That hasn't happened at all. The developer is in some respects disputing their culpability, their responsibility, and we're locking horns with them at the moment. But to be honest, they're really dragging their feet. And this is not just a question of money, this is a question of people's safety and people's lives.
Of course, you will be listening very, very closely to the closing statements of the inquiry this week. What do you want to see happen next?
I think there are 2 really, really important things. Number 1, there are still over 100 buildings up and down the UK that have dangerous Grenfell-style cladding, so that's ACM cladding. They have to be sorted out, they have to be made safe as a priority, and as an absolute priority. Number 2, we have to get developers to cough up. So many of them have made pledges, many haven't, including my developer, but pledges are nothing without actual money on the table. What I would like to see Michael Gove do, I think he's taken a big step forward in getting developers to the table, is actually holding them to account when they're not putting money on the table. So if they're not going to pay, if they're not going to cough up, then they shouldn't be getting public sector contracts. And I think that has to be one of the things that comes out of the concluding inquiry today.
Well, that was Paul Ashvar there speaking to me this morning. He is living in a building which is unsafe, which is wrapped in cladding similar to that was around Grenfell Tower. The developers of his block of flats, Southern Housing Group, have said that there is an ongoing programme in place to check the buildings and carry out any work required. But they do say, due to the limited number of qualified people and the demand for these services, that work is taking some time to complete.
And Ellie, given the amount of material and evidence they've had to sift through for this, is it any clear yet when the inquiry is likely to report?
Well, Mark, just to give you a sense of quite how much of a mammoth task this is, there's actually 4 days of closing statements. We've only had 1 morning so far, so still another 3.5 days to go, just sifting through those 320,000 documents which are being spoken about over these next 4 days. But what we do know is that the errors here are widespread, and it wasn't just the fault of one person or one body, but it was systemic failures across the board. Several companies who fitted the panels knew the fire risks associated with them. The government missed previous opportunities to learn about cladding. There had been a previous fire 8 years prior to Grenfell where 6 people died in a similar set of circumstances. And there was also the fire service, who we're actually going to hear from this afternoon. There was a failure of communication and training on the night as well. There was also that controversial stay put advice where residents were told to stay in their flats. That is going to be brought up this week as well. It's thought that there will be a report next year. It's not yet clear when it will be, but it looks like it will be towards the end of 2023. But for the residents and for the survivors of this Grenfell Tower blaze, they want to see answers, and they don't just want words, which is what we're going to hear so much of this week. They want to see action.
Indeed so. Ellie, live at the Grenfell inquiry for us. Thank you very much indeed for updating us. More from there, of course, as we get it. Now, victims of the contaminated blood products scandal are calling on the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, to ensure that those who allegedly covered it up are now held accountable. Up to 30,000 people were infected with contaminated products in the 1970s and 80s in what's been described as the worst treatment disaster in NHS history. One woman who was infected with hepatitis has told GB News that the fight for justice is ongoing, as Alice Porter now reports.
It's taken over my life. That's the price that I've had to pay for being infected by the state and also having to fight the state for justice.
Colette Wintle is a haemophiliac. When she was a teenager, she was infected with hepatitis B and C. She now has cirrhosis and has battled liver cancer. The ongoing inquiry into the scandal is partly the result of her tireless campaigning.
It seems to me incredible that over 3,000 haemophiliacs have now died, and to have nobody ultimately, even when this inquiry is done, being held to account for their part in this disgraceful medical scandal is shocking.
Next year we're going to have a report from the inquiry. What are your concerns?
I personally feel that there are certain individuals within the profession who remain alive now who should be prosecuted for what they did, because they cannot claim not to have the knowledge prior to treating their patients. They did know that they were taking risks with those patients' lives.
Colette has just received an interim payment of £100,000, with full compensation expected once the inquiry concludes. But children of victims are fighting for compensation. Lauren Palmer's father was infected with hepatitis C and HIV. He unknowingly infected her mother. They both died when she was 9.
I haven't been able to stay at home and save with a family. I've had to be very independent, and it's just brought on struggle after struggle. I haven't had that luxury of having two parents that can support me through life. The compensation is about the recognition and some element of justice being paid, but it doesn't really tackle everything, so charges won't be brought.
A government spokesperson said these interim payments are only the first step in addressing this historic wrong, and we acknowledge there is still more work to do. With another new Health Secretary in Cabinet, Colette is urging Steve Barclay to implement all recommendations from the inquiry when it concludes next year.
One of the things that's come out of this inquiry, which for me has been pretty shocking, was many of the people put in charge of the blood policy had no qualifications or training or background whatsoever. And mistakes were made by the dozen, and people lost their lives because of failure in government.
Alice Porter, GB News.
Fighting for more justice. Now, coming up, we'll have the very latest from Downing Street. Prime Minister saying he retains full confidence in the Cabinet Office Minister Sir Gavin Williamson, despite emergence of abusive texts that he sent to the former Chief Whip Wendy Morton. Pressure now mounting on the Prime Minister to discipline the former Education and Defence Secretary. Labour calling for an investigation. More on that next. First, let's get the latest news headlines. Rosie's waiting for us.
Good afternoon, 1:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The COP27 Climate Summit has been told the world's action on climate change is either collective solidarity or collective suicide pact. The UN Secretary-General says we're in the fight of our lives and we're losing. Antonio Guterres is calling for a universal early warning system within the next 5 years and for all governments to impose a windfall tax on fossil fuel companies. Prime Minister's due to address the conference this afternoon. Rishi Sunak's going to tell world leaders at the gathering in Egypt that the UK will become a clean energy superpower. Well, as world leaders gather to discuss climate concerns, environmental protesters have been disrupting traffic on England's busiest motorway. A number of people have now been arrested for public nuisance after sections of the M25 were closed this morning. A spokesperson for the group said similar action was taken at multiple locations along the motorway. Downing Street says the Prime Minister has a zero-tolerance approach to bullying. It's after Sir Gavin Williamson sent threatening messages to the former Chief Whip, Wendy Morton. Number 10 says Rishi Sunak retains full confidence in the Cabinet Office Minister and welcomes the fact that Sir Gavin expressed regret over the messages. Measures to prevent the spread of bird flu have now come into force across England. All poultry and captive birds must now be kept indoors as the UK faces its largest outbreak of avian flu. The virus has been discovered at over 90 properties and found in more than 200 dead wild birds since the start of October. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1460 and €1.1470. The price of gold is £1,462.82 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,318 points.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on
BC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, the latest from Downing Street, with the Prime Minister's judgment being questioned, particularly over the backing that's been announced for Sir Gavin Williamson, now the twice-sacked former minister, now Cabinet Office Minister, and who helped to organise Rishi Sunak's leadership campaign, had sent a series of offensive messages to the former Chief Whip, Wendy Morton. He reportedly accused her of trying to punish MPs by excluding them from the Queen's funeral list. Let's get more. Joining us in the studio, our political reporter, Catherine Forster. And he's been accused of other things as well. The list seems to be growing, but the message from Downing Street, while the Prime Minister is in Egypt, is that Mr Williamson is safe.
Yes, the Prime Minister's spokesman this lunchtime has said that the Prime Minister has full confidence in Gavin Williamson. And of course, Rishi Sunak was talking last night to journalists on the way to Egypt and was saying, yes, these comments were not acceptable. They were not right. He also stressed that although he had been told in advance of him appointing Gavin Williamson to his Minister without Portfolio role, that there had been a complaint by Wendy Morton, the former Chief Whip, that he had not known any of the specifics and that he hadn't seen these really quite shocking messages that were published by the Sunday Times until Saturday night when they were published.
Now, Gavin Williamson himself, a former chief whip, should we reflect that often the language used by chief whips is fairly forthright in terms of telling people what to do and when? And so therefore, a sort of spat between two former chief whips has to be taken in that context.
Yes, that's certainly true. Gavin Williamson is well known around Parliament as being knowing where all the bodies are buried, master of the dark arts. He famously kept a tarantula. He was pictured with a whip, not very subtly, on his desk. But, of course, times are changing. Now, whips have ruled with a combination of carrots and sticks, often more sticks.
So the carrot and stick, but no whip. Yes.
Yeah. But as more light is shed into the way things work, you know, these messages, arguable, are they bullying, are they not? They're certainly offensive. He certainly used expletives. They were certainly unpleasant. It wouldn't be tolerated in a normal workplace.
No, indeed.
Would it?
Yeah.
But Westminster does not work like a normal workplace.
Is the other aspect to this that's so near his new premiership and with all the other problems coming up November the 17th with the autumn statement, the Prime Minister cannot afford to lose any of his top team, whether it's Suella Braverman or Sir Gavin Williamson?
I think that's definitely right. I mean, it's literally 2 weeks tomorrow since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. Now, he promised a government with integrity, professionalism, accountability at every level. And already we've had the row about Home Secretary Suella Braverman. We've got the row about Gavin Williamson, also the comments about Matt Hancock. But Rishi Sunak is desperate to have a little bit of stability, desperate to paint the picture that all is well within the Conservative Party, that he is uniting them, bringing them together, and they are not squabbling among themselves.
Well, there was an alert on my computer about someone leaving I'm a Celebrity before it even started properly, and I thought, oh, right, OK, it's actually Olivia Attwood and not Matt Hancock. But
Matt Hancock's not joined just yet. Next couple of days, yeah.
But, how damaging could it be to the Tories? I mean, there's going to be something in those discussions around the campfire to reflect on what's happened with COVID, isn't there?
Certainly.
I think the size said it all. You don't need to say any more after that. I mean, number 10 must be bracing themselves, mustn't they?
They must be. They must be. And, of course, it's not a good look. He is being paid $82,000, whatever it is that they get per year, to look after and work for his constituents. Here he is, allegedly being paid $400,000 to be on the other side of the world. Now, OK, he says he wants to talk about dyslexia. He says he can cut through in a different way. But, I mean, the Prime Minister has made it clear that he doesn't think that this is a good look in any way, shape or form. So Rishi Sunak certainly got his work cut out trying to present and maintain a united
Even though we understand
party.
he's got dispensation to have, I think, a mobile phone and some other kind of communication.
He apparently can deal with constituency matters, but will he?
Deals with the kangaroo nether parts. That's the important thing, isn't it? For the moment, thank you for that. But let's now speak to Philip Blond, who's a former advisor to David Cameron. Philip, thank you for joining us. First to Sir Gavin Williamson, do you think he's safe?
Yes, I do, for the reasons you've just been discussing. Sunak doesn't want to start losing people. He knows that in politics, if you lose early appointments, it doesn't stop and the opposition keeps going for you. So I think he is safe. I think, as you yourself, Mark, has already outlined, this sort of language and interaction between a chief whip and a former chief whip is pretty normal for Westminster. It's politics. Politics in Britain is full of private expletives and public admissions of contrition. But it's not really a sackable offence on the basis of the text messages that I've read.
Right.
Inappropriate, yes, but little more than that.
However, it is now in the public domain, and I'm just reading what Sir Keir Starmer said earlier. Clearly, this man is not suitable for the job, and it's yet another gift to Labour, isn't it? That this government trying to gain traction, and it's yet another backward step for them.
Look, I'm sure in all of his private dealings, Keir Starmer has had many expletives directed at him, and it wouldn't surprise me if he used some himself. So this is, whether you like it or not, this is, I think, a normal modus operandi in Westminster. But of course, it's an advantage to the opposition. What they really want to do is get instability back on the Tory helm, if I can put it like that. And so they were going for Suella Braverman in quite a concerted way, and now Gavin Williamson has presented himself as another target.
Yeah, I'm just sort of leafing back in my notebook to when the Prime Minister came in, and I seem to remember the word integrity being written down. I mean, that is the problem, that they made the stand when they came in to replace Liz Truss, that this was going to be different. It doesn't seem to be.
Well, look, I think that, the overwhelming majority, this isn't normal language for an upper middle class workspace, agreed. But most of Britain doesn't view itself like that. And this might well be normal language in lots of other workplaces. And I don't think that majorities like the policing around language, which is an exclusively upper middle class kind of...
I don't know what class has got to do with it, because, I mean, a lot of people reflected if this did happen in a private company, HR would come down on that person pretty quickly. They might even be out on their year.
Well, they may do, they may not. I think it varies. What you've got in Britain today is governance by an upper middle class set of social mores that thinks that it's universally valid for all and everywhere. And I just don't think it is. And I think that what we've seen so far is certainly unacceptable. It's certainly not the language I would choose. But no, I don't think it's a sacking offence. I think it's a disciplinary offence within sort of more of a minor character.
OK, and what should the disciplinary offence be for flying all the way to Australia and appearing in the jungle? What should happen to Matt Hancock?
Well, I think that's more problematic. I tend to think that, I mean, it worked well for Nadine Dorries, and she didn't pay any really grievous penalty, did she? And she ended up doing rather well. I mean, I can see why politicians are attracted to it, because it increases your profile and so on and so forth. But I think the withdrawal of the whip is a very serious move. Also, Matt is not popular with many in his constituency party.
Yeah. I was going to come on to that. I mean, do you think the danger is he could be now deselected by his own constituents?
I absolutely think that could be a danger. I mean, after the revelations about his affair, it was a close-run thing anyway in his locality. And I think that I'm in two minds, really. I think that there is a case for people seeing the human side of MPs. There's a lot of very extreme language deployed against MPs who are just in many ways ordinary people. And there is an argument for putting them in things like this to allow people to connect. But by the same token, it's really hard to think that he could look after his constituents in the manner for which he was elected in the jungle in Australia, eating unspeakable things.
Yeah. I suppose unspeakable things at Westminster. Philip, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. I'm a Tory MP. Get me out of here. Thank you very much indeed. Now, rail commuters facing more disruption this morning, despite that planned strike by RMT union members actually being called off. 12 of the 14 train operating companies say they've been running a reduced service because staff rotas had been decided in advance for the strike week. Well, the walkout's planned for today and Wednesday, as well as over the past weekend. The RMT saying it had suspended that action after being promised an offer on pay. Let's get more with our national reporter, Theo Chikomba, joining us from Ashford International Train Station. And you were outlining, Theo, that things weren't too bad there. Clearly, the trains have been running, even though there was some disruption.
Yes, good afternoon. You're absolutely right. Interestingly, just before I came on air, I spoke to some students who said they weren't able to make it to college today because not only does Ashford International here, just behind me on my right, operate trains into London, to Margate, and towards Folkestone, but they also have trains going in the small villages just here in Kent. Now, over the last few days, as you mentioned, on Saturday, there were some disruptions, as on the 11th hour on Friday, the RMT announced that they had suspended the industrial action, which was due to take place on Saturday today and on Wednesday. Now, on Wednesday, they are saying they're hoping that trains will be running as normal, but at the moment, Avanti West Coast, they have said they'll be running a reduced service, and the others are still making plans, and they'll be posting those and allowing people to find out how they can travel. But the advice is to ensure that you check before you travel. Now, just on our RMT, they said they secured unconditional talks with Network Rail of a promise of a pay offer from the the train operating companies. And of course, staff have been feeling the pinch this year. So we've been talking a lot on GB News about the cost of living, and they do want a better pay rise. They haven't offered 4%, but they are, of course, still asking for more. Now, there is going to be a balloting taking place from RMT members shortly in a few weeks' time to decide whether they're going to be taking more strike action in the next couple of months.
On that, Thea, obviously people are feeling a bit bruised this morning, thinking that everything will be back to normal. What are we learning about the rest of the week, given that there was another strike planned for Wednesday? I mean, are the train crew going to be out of position then as well?
Well, tomorrow is supposed to be back to normal. On Wednesday, hopefully, train operators, they say they'll be running back to full timetables. But the thing we have touched on in the last few hours is, of course, it was very last minute, and obviously they have rotors, and a lot of those rotors were fulfilled, so people didn't have to come in. And of course, you know, we have to wait and see, of course, over the next few days as well, to see whether those trains will be running full timetables that they're supposed to.
Check with your train operating company, as they all keep telling us. For the moment, thank you very much for updating us there at Ashford. And we'll see, of course, what emerges from the talks about Thursday, when there's a London Underground strike planned as well. Now, the World Cup kicking off in a couple of weeks, and members of the England football team, it's a bit of a stressful time. And one of the stars, Harry Kane, and in fact Declan Rice too, talking about the importance of mental health. And they've been talking about that with no less than the Prince of Wales. Well, joining us now, royal reporter Cameron Walker. And Cameron, of course, the Prince did have this official position at the FA, so they're talking to the head man, if you like, about this.
He is. He's the president of the Football Association here in Great Britain. He sat down for a very frankly informal conversation with two football stars, two England stars, Harry Kane and Declan Rice, all about mental health and mental well-being and how being part of a team can support each other. So let's just have a little bit of a listen to what Prince William had to say.
It's really important that we have those moments and we have those people in our lives that give us that support, that mean it's okay, because there's going to be plenty of time when it's not okay. And those moments, then you come and say, listen, let's have a beer, let's sit down, let's have a chat, or let's have a cup of tea and have a natter about it, because I've got something on my chest, or I'm bothered by this, or maybe things didn't go quite like you hoped. And I think having those people in your life is really important.
Bit more coming in from what he was saying. I was a defender, I was stuck at the back and told to just tackle.
Yes, he was talking about... He was talking about his school days on the school football team and how he wasn't quite up to scratch as some of the perhaps professional players as we're seeing.
Put your boot in.
World Cup. Indeed, yes. But mental health is a cause he's long since championed. We saw him last week in Scarborough unveiling new funding for youth mental health at grassroots local organisations in Scarborough there. Of course, back in 2017, he launched his Heads Together campaign with the then Duchess of Cambridge, Catherine, and Prince Harry, all about tackling the stigma of talking about your mental health, a theme which we saw we can see Prince William doing there with the footballers and encouraging more people to talk, then therefore getting support. So it's something which he's been highlighting for a while.
But he's not going to Qatar.
He is not going to Qatar, as I understand it. There are no plans, but it wouldn't surprise me if England get very far in the tournament, that's his office, make a last-minute dash to get to there.
To actually ignore that, wouldn't it?
It would be, indeed. I mean, it's not to do with the controversies perhaps surrounding the fact that Qatar is hosting the World Cup. It's more to do with a very busy diary, logistics, and lots of engagements he's got coming up this autumn, as I understand it.
Now, of course, the other thing is, hanging over the Prince of Wales is the publication of his brother's book.
Yes.
And we are expecting this issue of mental health to actually feature quite highly in that as well, aren't we? Spare, as we saw.
Yes, of course, that's alluding to the fact that Prince Harry was always in Prince William's shadow growing up. But you talk about mental health, Mark. It was actually Prince William which suggested to Prince Harry that he should get support for his own mental health problems. He admitted to that in an interview with Angela Levin in Vanity Fair.
Yeah, gone off the rails a bit, didn't he? Drinking and sort of carousing and so on. And William was the one that said, I think you need to rethink your
Yes, exactly.
approach.
And we're expecting Prince Harry to talk in some detail about the experience that him and his brother went through walking behind their mother's coffin in 1997 following Diana's death in a car crash in Paris, and what they were experiencing as two very young boys having to do that in front of billions of people.
Give us a very quick bit of inside information as to how both Clarence House and the rest are preparing themselves. I mean, do they fear this could be quite damaging in some way?
I think there's certainly nervousness amongst courtiers within Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace, because the problem is they don't know what's going to be said. And it's highly likely that we're going to find, they will find out exactly the same time as us. Their official position is they're not going to be commenting on the book, but it wouldn't surprise me if perhaps they change their mind if there is a particularly controversial allegation.
Never complain, never explain, as we remember. Cameron, thank you very much for updating us on that. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with us, particularly with your thoughts on what's happening out in Egypt. Ian, hi. While the elites continue to go on jollies around the world in private jets and make ridiculous claims that we're all doomed, which have been proven wrong over the years, there's no wonder the alarmists are out blocking the roads. I think you've wrapped everything up there in one comment. Richard, if the heads of countries are concerned about climate change, why are they flying to meetings, which is the most polluting way, just to chat for an hour and then all fly home? All this can be done via secured internet video meetings. Very good point. And regarding those Just Oil protests, or Stop Oil protests, Don has said to us, police should be charging the protesters with conspiracy. They're not just causing a public nuisance, they're showing contempt for the rule of law. In fact, Don, I can actually reiterate that they are facing action for contempt of court because of the High Court injunction taken out to stop any protests around the motorways. We'll update you, of course, as we get more on that, as we will with all the other issues of the day. Don't go anywhere. Lots more to come in this final hour, including the likelihood of the biggest ever nurses' strike. Will that go ahead? First, an update on the weather.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather updates. A rather grey but mild Monday out there. This evening, we could see some squally conditions where the winds just suddenly whip up. That's going to be courtesy of this weather front coming in from the west. The isobars squeezing together. It's also going to bring a very short but intense spell of rain to parts of Wales, southwest England and Northern Ireland. We do have Met Office warnings in place. The heavy rain across southwest Scotland could also cause a bit of disruption. But here comes that line of rain. As I said, it shouldn't last too long, but it will zip through with some intensity and the winds will just suddenly pick up and could cause some damage. That band of heavy rain and strong winds works its way across all of England overnight, easing as it does so, but nevertheless could get woken up by a rattling of a window pane. As it clears, temperatures will drop to single figures, but generally another pretty mild night and another mild but boisterous, blusterous day to come on Tuesday. There'll be a bit more sunshine tomorrow, but there will also still be plenty of showers. Nowhere really immune from the downpours. And again, when the showers come along, they'll be heavy, perhaps even turn into thunderstorms at times. But they should again zip through because it will be quite blustery and it will still be fairly mild, 12 to 14 or 15 Celsius, maybe 16 with a bit of sunshine in the south. We'll keep a lot of showers around through the course of Tuesday evening, all spinning around a big area of low pressure up to the northwest. Wednesday will again bring plenty of showers and again some pretty heavy ones, mostly across parts of the south and the west. Looking a little drier on Wednesday, perhaps across parts of southern Scotland, and eastern England may not see too many showers by Wednesday afternoon. And again, there will be some sunshine around between the showers. And again, it will at times be fairly breezy, but it will still be mild with temperatures again, mostly a few degrees above average, 11 to 15, getting even warmer come the end of this week. Bye for now.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
On Mark Dolan Tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Very good afternoon. Thanks for being with us. You're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. And coming up, the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, is set to speak in Egypt. She's part of an all-female panel discussion at COP27, pledging unparalleled funding for countries suffering from damage caused by climate change. We'll be crossing live to Sharm el-Sheikh in a few minutes to bring you that discussion live, as well as Rishi Sunak coming up a little later in Egypt. And despite a court injunction, Just Stop Oil, well, they're just not stopping. They brought large parts of the M25 to a standstill, police managing to take some off the overhead gantries. But why do they think they're above the law too? We'll have the latest with our security editor, Mark White, on what else they may be planning. That's not him, by the way. And let us know what you think of all the topics we're discussing today. Tweet us at GB News or email gbviews@gbnews.uk. Before all that, the latest news headlines with Rosie.
A very good afternoon to you. 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rosie, keeping you up to date. The COP27 Climate Summit has been told the world's action on climate change is either a collective solidarity or collective suicide pact. The UN Secretary-General says countries need a clear, financed roadmap to prevent irreversible climate chaos. Antonio Guterres is calling for a universal early warning system within the next 5 years and for all governments to impose a windfall tax on fossil fuel companies. He says, we're in for the fight of our lives and we're losing.
The two largest economies, the United States and China, have a particular responsibility to join efforts to make this pact a reality. And this is our only hope of meeting our climate goals. Humanity has a choice, cooperate or perish. It is either a climate solidarity pact or a collective suicide pact.
The Prime Minister is due to address the conference this afternoon. Rishi Sunak is going to tell world leaders at the gathering in Egypt that the UK will become a clean energy superpower. Boris Johnson, who's also there, is calling for an end to defeatism. Earlier, he spoke at a Fringe event in a conversation with the New York Times.
We do need to use hydrocarbons in the transitional period. That's obvious. And yes, in the UK, there is more that we can do with our own domestic resources. This is not, however, this is not the moment to abandon the campaign for net zero. This is not the moment to turn our backs on renewable technologies.
Well, as world leaders gather to discuss climate concerns, environmental protesters have been disrupting traffic on England's busiest motorway. A number of people have now been arrested for public nuisance after sections of the M25 were closed this morning. One demonstrator explained why she decided to climb a gantry.
Hello, my name is Louise. I'm 24 years old, and I'm here. I'm here because I don't have a future. And you might hate me for doing this, and you're entitled to hate me. But I wish you would direct all that anger and hatred at our government. They are betraying young people like me.
The Prime Minister is also expected to speak with his French counterpart about the migrant crisis, a day after demonstrators staged a protest outside the Manston Processing Centre in Kent. Hundreds of people gathered in heavy rain, demanding the facility's closure and the sacking of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says Rishi Sunak and Emmanuel Macron need to discuss new tactics to deal with people smugglers.
The focus for my discussion would be on how we work upstream to stop the people smugglers. Before, as a politician, I was the Director of Public Prosecutions. I know how these cross-border operations work. We would work with France upstream to stop the smugglers in the first place. That's the discussion I would have. I hope it's the discussion that our Prime Minister will have.
Downing Street says the Prime Minister has a zero-tolerance approach to bullying. It's after it emerged that Sir Gavin Williamson sent threatening messages to the former Chief Whip, Wendy Morton. Number 10 says Rishi Sunak retains full confidence in the Cabinet Minister and welcomes the fact that Sir Gavin expressed regret over the messages. Measures to prevent the spread of bird flu have come into force across England. All poultry and captive birds must now be kept indoors as the UK faces its largest outbreak of avian flu. The virus has been discovered at over 90 properties and found in more than 200 dead wild birds since the start of October. Tom Koppers is the manager at Koppers Turkey, says there's no risk, though, to humans.
It's not a risk of human health, no. There is no, I've been had a good assurance as well, even if it was an infected bird, it's completely safe for a human to eat. It's more about trying to stop the spread of this disease and the spread of the disease through wild birds because of the huge effects it has. And obviously, it's currently in poultry. We don't want to see it jump to other breeds, whether it jumps to pigs or something like that. We want to obviously contain it to poultry.
There's ongoing disruption to rail services today, despite the train strikes being called off. The RMT union had cancelled the action after securing the promise, they say, of a pay offer from train companies. But the late suspension of the walkout means many operators are only running a reduced timetable. Network Rail says there's quite a mixed picture of delays and cancellations depending on the operator. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now, back to Mark.
Rosie, thank you very much indeed. So all eyes on the Egyptian resort of Sharm el-Sheikh this afternoon. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, in Egypt for the COP27 climate and in just under 2 hours making a speech where he will call for a global mission for clean growth. Well, stark warnings from the UN with Antonio Guterres saying that humanity must cooperate or perish and saying that we're on a highway to climate hell. Richer countries facing criticism from poorer countries for financial compensation for those who they say are responsible for the most historical emissions, including, of course, the UK. However, Downing Street insisting that we're already helping countries to deal with the impact of climate change. And a busy day for the Prime Minister as he's due to meet the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and the Israeli President, the new far-right Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. However, perhaps the most important, with the French President, Emmanuel Macron. They're likely to discuss the migrant crossings. The two sides apparently may be close to a deal aimed at preventing the migrants from risking that crossing. Well, joining us live in the studio, our political reporter, Olivia Utley, and our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, to see whether, as well as green being good, how expensive it could be. But Olivia, first to you. His first role on the international stage, let's reflect that just a few days ago, he wasn't necessarily going.
No, and I think that's been a little bit difficult for Rishi Sunak to recover from, because now every speech he makes about just how important this summit is, sort of people take it with a bit of a pinch of salt because he wasn't going to be there. I think what the biggest issue is going to be is this issue of reparations, climate reparations, of richer countries paying back poorer countries for the damage done by climate change. And it's an interesting idea and one that's been around for a while. Basically, the idea is that those who've contributed the most to climate change tend not to be the countries that suffer the most. So, for example, Pakistan is experiencing very, very extreme weather, but it's only responsible for 0.3% of carbon emissions, whereas the US is responsible for 20% and almost has no effect. So it's an idea on the table, it's an idea being discussed. Rishi Sunak's pushing back against it at the moment, which obviously makes a lot of sense domestically. The very last thing that people in Britain want with these huge tax hikes on the way, mortgage interest rate repayments biting, is to be told that they've now got to cough up to pay.
Especially when we think the bill could go back to Victorian days and coal and the Industrial Revolution and you know, everything that we spewed out into the atmosphere. It could be a pretty hefty bill.
It could be a hefty bill. And I think one of the issues, of course, is that it's going to be very difficult to work out who on earth caused what. Another issue which I've heard Conservative MPs mentioned is that we're supposed to believe that the Industrial Revolution was broadly a good thing. It raised life expectancy. It brought many people out of a life of sort of serfdom, pre-industrialisation. And we're proud of it. If you think back to the 2012 Olympic ceremony, it's something that we've celebrated. And then to sort of change tack and act as though we must apologise and hang our heads in shame and be guilty for the Industrial Revolution doesn't seem particularly Conservative.
On that topic, Liam, clearly green is good politically, but the big question about whether it works economically, and you know we've now got fracking that's gone back onto the sort of naughty chair. Questions about what happens about oil and gas, and how much we've got to invest in renewables. I mean, it's a really difficult thing for them to balance.
It is. I'm not sure green is good politically. It's good among, you know...
Well, certainly the UN would see it
yes,
that way,
there's certain people, a sort of younger demographic, mainly a sort of wealthier, younger demographic. I think for a lot of people, this stuff seems completely outlandish. They're trying to make ends meet and, you know, fill their vans with diesel so they can go to work and try and pay these massive tax rises that are on their way, as Olivia says. So the countries at COP, they've got a kind of headline figure that they're trying to deliver every year of sort of funny money, if you like. It's $100 billion. It sounds like a lot, but it's sort of, you know, it's 1/20th of the sort of GDP of the UK, which is, you know, the GDP is like 3% of the world economy. It's not a massive amount of money. It's just a kind of figure to rally round. Look, I think what's really going on at COP, certainly if the politicians are smart, is that they will try and combine the idea of moving away from fossil fuels, which in my view is broadly speaking a good idea, as long as ordinary people don't disproportionately pay for it, with the idea of energy security. Because there's a big difference between COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt and COP26 in Glasgow is obviously the war in Ukraine, the fact that we now are all thinking so much more about energy security, the fact that energy prices, domestic energy prices, have spiralled enormously. Now, the reality is, to actually produce renewable energy in this country, right, it's had years of subsidy. Per unit cost, renewable energy is now among the cheapest forms of energy, right? It's far cheaper to produce a megawatt hour of renewable energy than to produce a megawatt hour of electricity from a gas-fired power station, for instance. But none of that is coming through because the price that we pay on our bills outside of this energy price cap still reflects energy that's created by fossil fuels because our market for energy is rigged, it doesn't work particularly well. So what politicians need to do, in my view, is to say, look, this renewable stuff, it's not all about cost and sacrifice, and if you don't sign up to it immediately, you're immoral and people protesting. It's actually about delivering cheaper energy for you and your family in the long term. And as long as we have the situation, our energy market doesn't work, so cheaper renewable energy isn't getting through, no one's going to believe that. So they have to make the policy work, the technical parts of the policy work, to make the political message, I think, palatable.
And it is the reality at the moment, in terms of securing that energy security, that we have to bring some of those coal-fired power stations back online. We have to continue with having gas-powered stations, even though perhaps we actually get them from gas storage facilities rather than importing gas from the continent. All those things have to be in place for at least, 5-10 years until we sort the other sources.
You put your finger on it, Mark. There's a new kind of pragmatism now, a kind of reality check. As the sort of protesters have got, increasingly shrill in their methodologies and gluing themselves to things and hanging off sort of motorway infrastructure and so on. So as that's happened, the actual pressure on politicians to, make sure the lights stay on, frankly, has got much, much more important. And that is why I think they have to show that this, renewables, moving away from fossil fuels, can actually enhance our energy security, because if you make it work properly, they can.
OK, now talking about political pressures, of course, it's not just those members of the political elite that we've been talking about on the climate issue. He's going to be meeting President Macron on this issue of cross-channel migrants. What are we understanding as to what may be a solution that they're talking about?
Well, it sounds like they're building some sort of solution which would involve French taking back migrants at least for a little while. It's hard to say exactly until the details of the meeting come out what the plan is going to be. The problem is that, yes, Emmanuel Macron and Rishi Sunak are a pretty good meeting of minds. They're the same type of politician, if you like. Very, very different kettle of fish to Boris Johnson and Emmanuel Macron.
So he's more friend than foe this time around?
Definitely more friend than foe this time around, but the problem is that French and British premiers have come together before and agreed various types of solution. The problem is in the execution. It just doesn't ever quite seem to work.
We were told that one of the things they may be talking about is UK border force staff on the beaches of France, but without policing powers effectively, but just on the lookout, so they could alert the French as to what's going on. Now, one assumes that might be tricky for Macron, given the pressure he's under with a growing right-wing element in France.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just very little incentive for Emmanuel Macron to take on the brunt of migrants who are arriving on the shores of Dover. And obviously, you've got the right pushing back very hard, saying that they're the only ones who can control the borders. And if Emmanuel Macron is in the position where he's got British border force guards on his beaches, it looks a bit as though the French have lost control. The other issue is Emmanuel Macron has been, pushing for so long has been pushing against the British for so long on this issue, and has been massively, when it was Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, has been painting him very much as the sort of villain of the piece. And actually both sides have deliberately sort of upped the rhetoric. So now it's very difficult to unwind that, even though they want to.
Positions have been established, Now, of course, the other thing, as all these leaders meet and discuss and have the sort of drinks behind the scenes, they talk about Ukraine and the energy crisis. France, of course, has got plenty of nuclear energy. But where are we with the supplies coming across from the continent? Because we were at one stage reliant on, I think, Norwegian gas coming from, the various fields and so on.
So just bouncing off what Olivia just said there, look, this immigration stuff, obviously, it couldn't be more politically contentious. And yet it's also economically right at the heart of the debate as well. The Office for Budget Responsibility, which will be presenting forecasts when this autumn statement comes out
Rishi's shoulder
on the 17th of November, providing the forecasting framework within which he and his team have to make tough decisions about raising taxes, what they're going to do with spending and so on. They'll want to, if they think that there's going to be a big clampdown on immigration in general, aside from the small boats and so on, then they will think that that will curtail economic growth. They will think that that will mean less economic growth. It's not that we've got a shortage of people in this country in terms of the labour force. It's the fact that, 1 million people or so have left the workforce, the so-called quiet quitters, in their mid-40s, early 50s, after the pandemic. It isn't, and it certainly isn't because of Brexit that, there are more EU workers in the UK now than there were before 2016. So it's not as if people have left because of Brexit.
A lot of NHS staff have left because of the pension penalties, for instance.
Yeah, but they haven't left there. They're still in the UK. So if you tweak the pension rules,
inactive.
Indeed, you can tweak the pension rules to get them back in. And I know for a fact that's certainly what listeners and viewers will have heard it elsewhere as well. What ministers are looking at. But on this on this energy issue, I think it's absolutely crucial that people understand the UK, without being alarmist, we're in quite a vulnerable position. We haven't got the gas storage that the French and the Germans in particular have got. We closed down the rough undersea cavern where we stored our gas that accounted for about 3/4 of our gas storage, Mark. We are now really dependent, not just on a pipeline from Norway, right, but also dependent on imports of LNG, what's liquefied natural gas, coming over from the US. Now, we have LNG docking facilities in the UK, pretty much, among the best in Europe. We have 3 big LNG ports. The Germans have none. They're trying to build some kind of temporary floating ones out there in the Baltic Sea. And that, in some senses, makes us more receptive and more able to take in American imports, but we're still reliant on those imports. What we haven't got is the sort of 80, 90 days of gas storage that the Germans have got. We've only got like 10 or 12 days of gas storage. And if it gets really nasty geopolitically, if it gets really, really cold, if the Kremlin wants to turn the screw even more in terms of... Because we're still getting lots of oil and gas from Russia. I mean, don't think that we're not. We are, despite the rhetoric. Then I do think the UK will be susceptible to what we call the spot price, having to buy gas on the day at high. You basically become a price taker. You become susceptible to the full ravages of the market. That is our Achilles heel. And in my view, that's really what the markets were worried about when it came to this mini budget. It wasn't the top rate of tax. It was the cost of delivering gas and electricity at a certain capped price when we as the UK are vulnerable and the government has to subsidise the difference between the market price and the price that's guaranteed.
And of course, there have been wargaming power outages as well. So let's hope Jack Frost doesn't visit us too soon. Liam and Olivia, thank you very much indeed. And of course, we'll see what emerges from Sharm el-Sheikh throughout the afternoon. Also coming up, parts of the M25 closed today after Just Stop Oil climbed the gantries, demanding more action on, yes, the climate crisis. More on that because they've, been told by the court to stop it. Let's take a quick short break.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Now, the Royal College of Nurses is set to announce its biggest ever strike after reports that a large majority have indeed voted in favour of a walkout over pay. The government says it does have contingency measures in place for the strike action and that the most essential services will be prioritised, as they say, but if the strikes take place, they would affect non-urgent but not emergency care, we're being told. Let's get more now with Lucy Johnson joining us, health editor at the Sunday Express. Lucy, thanks for your time. What are you learning about the ballot result as such?
Well, it looks like there is going to be a strike, and it is, we've really hit the buffers now that nurses are going to strike. It is pretty unprecedented, and they don't do it easily. If you look at it, nurses do earn less than the average. They earn less than teachers on average, and we've got nurses going to food banks. So in a way, I do have every sympathy for them, and they've had a sort of decade of real-term wage cuts, such that they're effectively doing a day free each week because of the cuts they've had over the last 10 years. So it is a huge problem, but of course it's one that, if we look at in the broader context, we've been quite happy to spend a lot of money, 400 billion on COVID countermeasures. A lot of that was to private companies, and we really need to start investing in people, and that's one thing that seems to have been overlooked. And it's happening across the NHS, across the board. We have a shortage of all NHS staff.
The government's saying that NHS staff overall received an average pay award of 4.75%, which they say has been sort of fairly reasonable. But obviously, given the rate of inflation and, as you say, that where they started from on that sort of platform, clearly just in cash terms, a lot of these health and nursing staff are struggling.
Yes, I think so. And with inflation running at 10%, it's not going to cover their costs. And we do know that nurses are going to food banks. And another problem, actually, my mum's a nurse, and I talked to her a lot about this, and she's very passionate. And one thing she feels very strongly about is the fact that, when she trained decades ago, you were paid to train. Nowadays, nurses have to fund their own way, and then they end up, with a starting salary of 21,000 about, and with a massive debt. So that's a disincentive to go into the profession in the first place. So really, nurses, I think, must be very, very angry to, I think most of them don't, they do care. They don't want to have to do this, but I feel that many of them feel there is no option. So I think that, we need to, the NHS in a round is sort of going back to the dark ages, isn't it? We're having people that are dying, waiting for care, or not getting care at all. And we need to look at the whole system and try and work out, how to reform it, because it's not working.
And as you've touched on it, not just the pay, but the staffing as well. Clearly, that is affecting the conditions. What is this likely to do, however, for frontline care? We're being told that it may be what they call a bank holiday service. Clearly, that no nurse or member of medical staff is going to let people suffer. But there will, I guess, be added pressure now on the waiting list, for instance.
Well, we have a 7 million waiting list at the moment, so 1 in 10 of us is waiting for, and that's going to add to that. And even though people, no medical professional will want people to suffer, people are suffering. They're already suffering. People are dying with cancers or are presenting late with cancers. We've had 30,000 excess deaths from heart disease, and we're seeing pandemic levels of excess deaths, something like 1,500 excess deaths every single week. In the last week we saw that, and most of those are not COVID related. So people are already suffering and dying as a result of the system, which is breaking down. And we need to look at it as a whole, I think. And if nurses strike, then other people, there's a lot of ancillary staff, there's porters, there's a huge amount of people that the NHS employs. They have every right to strike too. And then is it teachers? Is it police? Is it, there's lots of public sector workers that have a good justification to go on strike as well. Are we facing a winter of discontent?
Well, indeed, as you say, with obviously the government indicating that public pay awards may be capped to about 2% on November the 17th. We shall learn that as it comes around. But Lucy Johnson, health editor at the Sunday Express, thanks very much indeed for joining us here on GB News Live. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Now, let's reflect that a total of 23 people have been arrested, police say, after those Just Stop Oil protests, where people had climbed the gantries across the M25 network this morning. Activists getting on top of 8 gantries, we're told, closing sections of the motorway in both directions. These are the pictures a little earlier as tens of thousands of commuters tried to get to work. Motorists at a standstill around several junctions in Surrey, Hertfordshire, London and Essex. Well, the Met say they launched what they say was a significant operation to try to identify and arrest those suspected of preparing the disruption, making 3 arrests last night. Let's get the very latest with our GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White joining us in the studio. And Mark, you were trying to reassure those people stuck in their cars listening to us on GB News Radio that obviously the police were trying to get on top of this, but it's been quite cleverly orchestrated, isn't it, in terms of the junctions and so on?
Yeah, it has. I mean, the good news is our producer Tom has just been checking out the latest on the M25, and the incidents involving Just Stop Oil appear to have been resolved. You were reporting there are 23 individuals that are now in custody.
Yeah.
But obviously there are lingering effects. And of course, there's all the usual chaos on the M25 of accidents and breakdowns that are being reported. So it's not good out there. But we can take a look actually at a map on the screen as to where these...
I think they're still preparing that. So paint us a picture, especially for those in the cars on the radio. Because, I mean, I got a list here of junctions affected earlier from 6 and 8 to 9 down in Surrey, all the way up to 30. I mean, is it still... right the way around the orbital motorway?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much around the circumference of the M25 at strategic locations. There were these protests, about 8 or 9 separate protests. So well planned. The Metropolitan Police carried out these raids last night when they got word that this was planned for today. Roger Hallam, one of the leaders of Just Stop Oil, was among those arrested.
Oh, really?
But that wasn't enough, clearly, to stop what was already in the pipeline.
Delayed, but here it is. There's the map for those of you listening on radio. There's lots of triangles with exclamation marks, as you may well imagine. But looking at the geographic spread, I mean, clearly they were doing this with these gantries to try and bring, I guess, the whole motorway to a standstill.
That's the only conclusion you can garner from that, is clearly it's all the way around the M25 at these strategic locations. So it had the net effect of halting pretty much all of the M25 in those key locations.
Now, people have been asking how on earth they managed to get up to the gantries, but they actually had time to film themselves as well. This was the clip of, I think, Louise, 24-year-old protester, and this is what she put out there.
I'm here because I don't have a future. And you might hate me for doing this, and you're entitled to hate me. But I wish you would direct all that anger and hatred at our government. They are betraying young people like me. I wouldn't have to be there if they did their lawful duty to their own citizens.
So clearly not accepting any responsibility herself, it seems, but pointing out to the government. There may be quite a few motorists there who are shedding tears of frustration at that particular action as well.
Well, there's no doubt. There's lots of angry people being caught up in this. And they always, when you speak to members of the public who have been caught up in this kind of action, they always say, well, why not get involved directly in politics and try to make a difference? Or at the very least, if you're going to protest around the heart of government, outside Downing Street and outside...
Not that we're encouraging that, of course.
No, indeed. That's what members of the public would say, Mark.
Yeah, but obviously a High Court injunction in place, so those people are actually now in contempt of court if they do carry on.
It might take quite a long time before actually we get to the point where anyone is jailed, but it had an effect with the last set of motorway blocking that took place earlier in the year. So
we shall watch and wait, as lots of people are doing on the M25. Mark, as ever, thanks for updating us, and we'll bring you the latest as we get it. But first, let's get an update on the news headlines. Rosie's waiting for us.
A very good afternoon to you. 2:33, I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The COP27 climate summit's been told the world's action on climate change is either a collective solidarity or collective suicide pact. The UN Secretary-General says we're in the fight of our lives and we're losing. Antonio Guterres is calling for a universal early warning system within the next 5 years and for all governments to impose a windfall tax on fossil fuel companies. The Prime Minister is going to address the conference this afternoon, and Rishi Sunak will tell world leaders that the UK will become a clean energy superpower. Well, as those discussions go on in Egypt, environmental processes here have been disrupting traffic on England's busiest motorway. 23 people have been arrested after police were forced to shut sections of the M25 this morning. Downing Street says the Prime Minister has a zero-tolerance approach to bullying. It's after it emerged that Sir Gavin Williamson sent threatening text messages to the former Chief Whip, Wendy Morton. Number 10 says Rishi Sunak retains full confidence in the Cabinet Office Minister and welcomes the fact that Sir Gavin expressed regret over the messages. Measures to prevent the spread of bird flu have come into force across England. All poultry and captive birds must now be kept indoors as the UK faces its largest outbreak of avian flu. The virus has been discovered at over 90 properties and found in more than 200 dead wild birds since the start of October. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Mark will be back in a moment.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, of course, we're discussing this topic with Mark a few minutes ago, but the Metropolitan Police have now launched what they call a significant operation to identify and arrest the climate change activists that they suspect of planning what they call were reckless and serious disruptions on the M25. The Assistant Commissioner at the Met, Matt Twist, has confirmed that police arrested 3 people last night, a further 23 today. Officers saying they're expecting to apprehend more people this evening. Well, according to the recent figures released, more than 10,000 officer shifts had to be dedicated to policing the Just Stop Oil protest since the start of the action in October. I want to break down the issue further. We're joined now by former Detective Chief Inspector Mike Neville. Mike, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Clearly, it seems to be a two-stage protest, and that is identifying those people who have actually carried out the protests and then going through the process of getting them charged or arrested and charged. But what we're learning about last night is that people were apprehended before they could carry out any protest.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's happening now, the police are using the conspiracy laws, which enable them to arrest anybody who's makes an agreement with another person to commit crime. So obviously there's a conspiracy to cause public nuisance here. And it's good to see that the Met are being proactive about this and actually getting hold of these people before they can cause serious disruption. Because as we've already seen, it's not just people who just want to get to work or get their kids to school. It's also people who want to get to a hospital or ambulances and fire engines and police cars being stopped. And that young lady we saw, it's rather tragic, but it's almost like these people are part of a cult. There's an absolute need to believe it's the end of times, the end of days, the world's going to end. It's some sort of bizarre religious thing. But if they want to do this and protest, as has been said, they could join a political party or they could march around Hyde Park or round Parliament Square and make their point. But the problem is at the moment they're causing massive disruption and probably costing lives.
Yeah, I mean, that is the difficulty. I mean, civil liberties mean you have to have the right to protest and to have your voice heard and perhaps even take direct action if you feel it necessary. But where does the line get drawn? Because clearly trying to prove conspiracy in a court case is going to be a very difficult thing.
Well, I imagine there's all sorts of emails that have been exchanged. There'll be all sorts. The police may have been recording conversations. There could have been. There's all sorts of evidence that will show that people are acting in unison together with messages on WhatsApp or on the mobile phone, text messages. So, given that they can seize these items, especially the computers and emails, they can show that there is a conspiracy. And you're right. We don't want to live in a country where people can't protest. But you can legitimately protest without bringing misery to millions of people who then simply don't support your cause. And also, probably more the worst thing is that the risking lives by blocking emergency vehicles. So, yes, legitimately protest, but do not do what they're doing at the moment.
Yeah, I'm looking back at, as we're discussing with Mark White, what happened with the Insulate Britain protests. And clearly, eventually, the court action with a High Court injunction succeeded then. Do you think that's the best way forward now? We've had the injunction issued, I think, to stop people, from national highways going anywhere near the M25 as a named route.
Absolutely. This is a sort of a proactive tactic that they can use. They can use the conspiracy laws, and then at last resort, if these people start doing other things, the police can be robust and arrest them. And I just hope the police are getting the message, because too often in the past we've seen them be rather soft on what you might call fashionable things like Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter, whereas if they dealt with these people in the same way they dealt with Millwall football fans, if they started lining the road, then I think the public would be much more pleased about it.
Yeah, again, the difficult sort of line allowing people to make their protest and having their voice heard and actually taking direct action. But is part of the difficulty so many police have to be involved in ungluing protesters, for instance? They have to have a special kit to actually melt the glue and then take them away and process them. That's what's caused difficulties for the policing operation.
Yes, of course. But of course, you can get all sorts of agents that would clear the glue. But it's like anything. You know, somebody said to me, "Oh, why has it taken 5 or 6 officers to carry that, young girl away or whatever?" You try and drag your granny down the stairs if she doesn't want to go there. It takes 4 or 5 people to get hold of somebody who doesn't want to move. It's as simple as that. So that does tie up police resources. But hopefully the police are turning up with the right equipment, the right, agents that can unglue them from the road. I think the public would. They've seen some videos of the French police where they just simply pull them off the road, whether they've glued themselves or not. Maybe we need some lessons from the French police. But it's right, as I keep reiterating, that people should protest. But there's a way to do this without causing massive inconvenience, which simply loses you the support of the people you're trying to get it from.
And, of course, treat your granny nicely. That's the other thing we should add. Mike Neville, former Detective Chief Inspector from the Met, thanks for joining us. Thank you for your time.
No problems. Thank you.
Now, let's head across the Atlantic for the US midterm elections taking place tomorrow. Millions determining the next makeup of Congress and, therefore, the political makeup of the USA. Joe Biden, though, not on the ballot. Normally, in the midterms, a good indicator of how a US president is performing halfway through their presidential term. Now, most analysts predict a disaster for the Democrats and the president. The likelihood that an emboldened Republican Party will see... Yes, a certain Donald Trump announcing a third run for the White House. Well, joining us now, Dr. Colin Provost, the Associate Professor of Public Policy at UCL. Dr. Provost, thank you very much for joining us. I gather that the Democrats have actually launched what they say is a do-no-harm strategy by keeping Biden away from the cameras.
Right. Well, that's a very interesting strategy. At this point, I think they're just doing their best to put out the message that they can, but they're fighting upstream against the economic situation, which is that inflation is quite bad, the economy is not doing well, and this is what voters seem to care about the most. Democrats are talking quite a bit about how democracy is on the ballot, how we need to have Democrats in power because of abortion access.
Yeah.
But these messages do not seem to be resonating with voters quite as much as the economic situation and the high inflation that voters are feeling.
So it's going back to those Clinton days. It's the economy stupid. It still applies.
It still applies. It has always applied. But it's also when you combine that with the fact that the party in power does not usually do very well in the first midterm elections or midterm elections in general. It's extremely rare that the party in power does well in this situation, that they pick up seats or add to their majority. So when you take that and you combine it with the economic situation, that means it does not look as good for Democrats as it could.
But is there a particular problem here with Biden and the various missteps and gaffes? I mean, I think his approval rating is at 42%. And it's been very noticeable that the various rallies so far, it's been a certain Barack Obama who's appeared and got the crowds going.
Well, it makes sense that Barack Obama would appear because he's still a hugely popular figure in the Democratic Party. And so many Democratic voters probably wish he was still president. So it's not surprising that he's showing up. He's also quite articulate. He doesn't make some of those flubs that you referred to that Biden might be making. But in terms of Biden and his greater influence in that regard, I think that's probably a question Democrats might start having after Tuesday. I don't necessarily. It's not certain, but that's something that will come a little bit later, if at all.
OK. And what about those people who perhaps would like Donald Trump to be still president? I'm looking at the various ratings. Latest suggestions, Trump at 71%, Ron DeSantis at 10%, Mike Pence at 7%.
Right. Well, I wouldn't put Mike Pence in that race necessarily. It sounds as though Donald Trump is going to declare that he's running again, but he's been known to announce big news is right around the corner and then never really follow through with it. So I think that's something he wants to drag on for a while. What would probably the most interesting thing to look out for is that Ron DeSantis does stand a good chance of announcing his own candidacy for 2024. He seems like a candidate that would appeal to most of the Republican Party. Some Trump supporters like him because he's kind of like Trump, but without all the drama and scandal.
Yeah, is that why Donald Trump has given him the title Ron DeSanctimonious, that he does actually believe that he could be a threat?
Yes, almost certainly. I think there's probably two factors there. Number one, Trump supposedly believes that DeSantis has not been sufficiently loyal to him and thankful for his endorsement in 2018, the first time that he ran for governor, and he won in a very close race back then. That's the first thing. But then, Trump also almost certainly rightfully sees that DeSantis is his closest competitor in 2024. Mike Pence is probably not. He's probably seen as more of a traitor by many Republican voters, particularly those who think that the 2020 election was stolen. So DeSantis though is a much more legitimate contender and competitor to Trump, and I think that's what Trump is thinking about when he comes up with these nicknames.
But what do you think the midterms are going to tell us now about what many say is a divided United States, and some even warning about the possibility of civil unrest or civil war of some kind?
Well, the United States has been divided for some time. It's heavily polarized, and that will continue to be the case, right? Particularly, and we'll see that in policy making. If the Republicans take over both houses of Congress, it looks very likely that they're going to take over the House. The Senate has been more of a toss-up, although it's been leaning more and more Republican in recent days. So you're going to see more gridlock at the federal level if the House is taken by Republicans, but especially if the Senate is as well. In terms of civil unrest and this sort of thing, that's much more difficult to predict. But we do know that some Republicans, kind of following Trump's playbook from 2020, have said that they might challenge election results if they lose. They might not accept them. What they do after that is anybody's guess, whether they legally challenge in the courts or they try to provoke civil unrest out in the streets. Either way, I think it probably is not great news for election workers, those who have to go and work polls in 2020 and on Tuesday. They might be under more severe threats, as we've seen is the case with a lot of civil servants in this situation. So it's difficult to know precisely what's going to happen. But yes, there is reason to think that there could be some bad situations or potentially violence as a result of some election results.
And a very unhappy reflection on the process of democracy itself. Dr. Colin Provost, Associate Professor at University College London, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Now, let's reflect that the Royal British Legion's Field of Remembrance has opened today at the National Memorial Arboretum, the field paying tribute to those who've lost their lives in conflicts from World War I to the present day. More than 8,500 commemorative markers and crosses have been planted there. Our West Midlands reporter Jack Carson was there to see it.
Will you join me here at the National Memorial Arboretum here in Staffordshire, where today marks the opening of their Field of Remembrance. 8,500 crosses and other commemorative memorials have been placed here to remember those servicemen and women who served all the way from the First World War up to present day as well. There was a 2-minute silence in the service, as well as representatives from the British Army, Royal Navy and Royal Air Force, as well as veterans who attended to remember their service and their comrades as well. One of those veterans is Malcolm Smith, who served 4 tours in Northern Ireland, and I caught up with him to talk about his service and why he remembers.
Right from the beginning, where in the early 70s, which was when on my first tour, it was very, very hostile and things were tough. He didn't have proper places to go and sleep or rest. We found us that we were sleeping in factories, buses, anywhere really they could put us, because obviously when they sent us out there was no camps. It's very basic.
And how did what went through your mind in order to get through that period and keep that strength to keep?
Well, I was a young man, 18 years old. What kept me going and the strength was the camaraderie and all the training, what we did together as a group. Although we were poorly equipped, but we still got on and did the job and just got on with it.
And coming out of service and looking towards remembrance, what are the things that you remember when it comes to this time every year?
It's thimportance of paying our respects to all the people who sacrificed their lives to give us the life we've got today, and to all the people who donate towards the Poppy Appeal, which all helps us veterans with problems with our mental health issues.
And tell me a bit about the help that you've had with the British Legion.
Yeah, I've been lucky. I've had tremendous help. I've had help off the National Health Service with my medications in that respect and assessments. And then I went to the Royal British Legion Battleback Centre, where they really, really got to grips with me and put me back on track in life so I could go out and do things what I used to do in my younger days.
And how has your kind of remembrance changed before and after your service? Are there specific people that you now remember at this time?
Yeah, especially my fallen comrades, especially Lofty Morrell, who was my platoon sergeant when I was a raw recruit. He helped me in life to get me through my training, and I pay a lot of respect to him here with laying a poppy cross and going down to visit his tree in the Ulster Grove.
And you laid a cross today. Tell me a bit about what this memorial means to you.
It means a lot to me, so I can pay my respects to the people who have given me the life I've got today, and I'm grateful and thankful for. And plus, for all the people what contribute towards the Poppy Appeal. and I can't thank you everybody enough for what they do for us.
Malcolm Smith there showing how the Royal British Legion helped him after his service and why he remembers at this crucial time. Of course, this week is Remembrance Week, Remembrance Day on Friday and Remembrance Sunday as well. These fields of remembrance are open until the 28th of November. There's 6 in total across the country and 55,000 commemorative plaques, all with a personal message to those servicemen and women who served all the way from the First World War to present day in those fields across the country. But today marking the opening of the one here at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire.
And Malcolm's story, of course, underlining why those acts of remembrance are so important, and those 8,500 poppies and crosses with his crosses, one of those acts of remembrance. So lots of you have been getting in touch with us today with your thoughts, particularly on the climate crisis and that COP27 summit out in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. The Prime Minister due to talk from there a little later. We'll have that live for you here on GB News. Graham been in touch to say, how many wind turbines does the UK need to reliably replace fossil fuels for electricity generation? Question mark. I've never heard a protester explain this. John, meanwhile, has been in touch to say solar and wind would work so well in Birmingham today. Maybe they should make something fuelled by rain. Good thought. The climate crisis, says Dave, is too big to stop. We've gone past the point of no return. I think many scientists may agree with you there. Instead of spending money trying to stop or reverse global warming, we should be spending money on how to live with it. Regards the Just Stop Oil process now, Jack's been in touch to say it would be so easy for the police to infiltrate them and stop the major things before they happen, plus take down the organisers. The rest will then fold. Although clearly, obviously, they would say they still have the right to protest. We'll update you on what's happening around the M25 throughout the rest of the afternoon. Well, thank you for being with us here on GB News Live. We're back tomorrow at 12, but coming up next is Patrick with all the latest, particularly with that Prime Ministerial speech in Egypt. You won't want to miss that. Let's get an update now on the weather, though.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. A rather grey but mild Monday out there. This evening, we could see some squally conditions where the winds just suddenly whip up. That's going to be courtesy of this weather front coming in from the west. The isobars squeezing together. It's also going to bring a very short but intense spell of rain to parts of Wales, southwest England and Northern Ireland. We do have Met Office warnings in place. A heavy rain across southwest Scotland could also cause a bit of disruption. But here comes that line of rain. As I said, it shouldn't last too long, but it will zip through with some intensity and the winds will just suddenly pick up and could cause some damage. That band of heavy rain and strong winds works its way across all of England overnight, easing as it does so, but nevertheless could get woken up by a rattling of a window pane. As it clears, temperatures will drop to single figures, but generally another pretty mild night and another mild but boisterous, blusterous day to come on Tuesday. There'll be a bit more sunshine tomorrow, but there will also still be plenty of showers. Nowhere really immune from the downpours. And again, when the showers come along, they'll be